After I told my wife about this subreddit, she told me I had to share the story. However, I joined specifically to share it, so please forgive me if I transgress somehow. And before I should start, I should note that ordinarily I'm the kind of guy who scares people inadvertently. I swear, I had really long hair at the time and I have a very deep voice. Also, this is a long one. In 1996, I was sort of flailing, working for a company unloading 18-wheelers at a grocery store warehouse and getting over a bad breakup. Because I worked from 6 until all the trailers were unloaded, usually around 11 p.m., and because I was kind of a night owl, I would typically stay up until 5 or 6 in the morning and sleep till noon. Gas was cheap back then, and I had often spent a couple of nights a week just driving aimlessly. It wasn't unusual for me to cover a couple 100 miles on back roads, just thinking and listening to music, although my trips were typically shorter. One night, I got on the highway and eventually ended up at a local lake at about 2 o'clock-ish. I decided I had enough and wanted to go home, but I've always hated going back the same way I got somewhere. I knew there was a cutoff that led back to a country road that I could take to get home, so I started to look for it. I was cruising along pretty slowly looking for the road, and as I passed under a big mercury vapor light, I noticed a truck sitting under a tree on the side of the road. I missed the road and had to make a U-turn, so I wasn't paying attention to the truck. But when I got a couple 100 yards down the road, I saw a pair of headlights falling behind me. I didn't think too much of it at first, but I functioned at a high base level of paranoia, so I kept an eye on the lights. I wasn't going too fast, so when the vehicle came up behind me going quite a bit faster than I was, I slowed down and eased over to the right a little bit, and they just sat there about a car length from my bumper. At that point, my paranoia kicked into high gear, and I sped up to about 80 and then slowed back down. The truck stayed with me no matter what I did. When I got to the ranch road, I had the choice of going right and heading towards home or going straight and making a loop through a mostly empty community that would take me back to the road I needed to be on. Of course I went straight and the vehicle stayed with me, although it dropped back a little bit. I knew at that point that whoever it was way too committed to screwing with me, so as soon as I hit the main road, I took off and went as fast as I could. Unfortunately, my anemic little Ford Tempo wasn't that fast, and the truck that was following me was a lot faster. When the driver caught up again, he started flashing his lights at me and got so close that I couldn't see the indicator lights on the truck. At that point, I was truly pissed off, so I started tapping my brakes to get him to back off. When I did that, the truck whipped up beside me, and I could see the driver waving frantically. I knew I wasn't going to have this son of a bitch chase me all the way home, so I pulled over at the first clear spot I saw. Yeah, I know. And rolled down my window. The truck pulled up beside me, and I could see that it was a greenish late 80s Chevy, and the driver rolled the window down. I was really taken aback because the driver was wearing a long, curly, rowdy blonde wig and Jackie O sunglasses, but it was clearly a man, and when he spoke, it was in a really high, creepy falsetto. Me. Man, why in the hell are you following me? Weird guy. Well, I just wanted to tell you that when you turned onto the road back there, I saw sparks coming from under your car, like by the brakes. Right. Thanks, but I got it. And then I rolled up my window and took off. As I did, he whipped his truck around and tore off back the way we'd come. Weird and creepy, but I didn't think a whole lot of it. A couple of years later, I was managing a restaurant in the town where I went to college, and those of us who worked there were prone, after we closed, to sending someone to the liquor store across the street so that we could sit under the shade trees and decompress for a while before going home. One afternoon, we were all trading stories, and I told my creepy falsetto weirdo story. One of the waitresses turned white as a ghost and said, "Really? That happened to me." She was coming home late one night from visiting her parents who lived about 100 miles away. She picked the truck up, passing the cutoff where I'd rejoined the main road, and he followed her the same way he did me until she pulled over. And then he told her the exact same thing he told me. But that she thought the truck was blue and he was wearing a different wig. She said she considered getting out for a split second, but then common sense kicked in and she tore off down the road. Instead of turning around like he did it with me, he kept following her and even pulled up beside her and tried to run her off the road. Fortunately, he wasn't able to intimidate her into swerving, and as soon as she hit the city limits, he laid on the brakes and went back the way he'd come. There was a certain amount of half-drunk planning to bait the guy into following again, but it never came to anything, and I don't think she ever filed a police report. I know I never did. I was always a theater geek, so freshman year of high school, I was in the school play, Reviving Ophelia, which was actually about an abusive relationship. Oh, the irony. John didn't do theater, but I met him through mutual theater friends. The group of us would hang out while waiting for our rides after rehearsal, and soon, John was somehow always there to hang out with us. He always said he had either stayed after for a club meeting or got stuck in detention for skipping class. John was also in some of my classes and would text me or Facebook message me after school, so we got to know each other really well. One day, one of our mutual friends, Sarah, and I were talking from theater, and she mentioned how John was basically in love with me. I laughed it off like, yeah, okay, whatever, and she started poking me playfully, saying, "He calls you the Bella to his Edward." Twilight was at the height of its popularity back then. I'm pretty sure he only gets detention to stay after and see you. This was all pretty light teasing, but John was a bit of a troublemaker, the class clown who always got kicked out of class, and I was the goody two-shoes. I liked talking to John, but I didn't want that much attention from him. So being the immature freshman that I was, I didn't see how to handle the situation any other way than cutting him off completely. I sometimes regret this choice, thinking if I had talked to him and let him down easy, the next few years wouldn't have been a living nightmare, but honestly, I doubt that would have made a difference. John messaged me relentlessly, asking what happened and why I wouldn't talk to him. Again, I was immature and didn't know how to handle it, so I just didn't respond. He would still show up to our after-rehearsal hangouts, but I started doing homework while waiting for my ride as an excuse not to talk to anyone. John moved his seat to sit behind me in every one of our classes together. When the teachers asked him what he was doing, he would say he forgot his glasses at home and had to sit closer to the board. He would whisper behind me, "Still not going to talk to me, Nikki?" Nikki's a mute now. If I answered a question in class, I got, "Oh, so you can talk." He leaned forward and blow on my hair or whack it with his pencil. Anything to try to get a rise out of me. If the teachers noticed, they told him to knock it off, but like I said, John was trouble, and even the teachers got tired of arguing with him after a while. His dramatic, "Who, me?" would never fail to get a laugh out of the class though. At the end of all the school shows, the same kid would throw a cast party. His parents gave him the house for the weekend, and his older brother supplied the alcohol. After hours of begging my parents to let me stay over at the party, they didn't like the idea of a co-ed sleepover. They finally let me go. Being a freshman, and this being my first night of drinking, I went overboard and ended up passing out in a random bedroom. John had been at the party, but we mostly stayed on opposite sides of the house. That is, until I woke up with him on top of me. My pants pulled down, and he was holding my hand, shoving it down his pants. I tried to pull my hand back, but he held it firmly inside it. When I tried to shove him off, he whispered, "Be quiet. There are other people asleep in the room." "Just relax," he said. I told him if he didn't let go, I was going to scream, and he let go of my hand. And I shoved him off, running out of the room. I found my friend Sarah asleep on the couch downstairs and lay on the floor in front of the couch, now wide awake. I started to hear my name tauntingly being whispered as footsteps descended down the stairs. The stairs faced the back of the couch, so as long as he didn't come around, he wouldn't see me. I pulled myself close to the couch and prayed he would just leave. After pausing for a few moments, he eventually did, waiting for my parents to pick me up in the morning. Watching him skip around laughing with everyone, like nothing happened, was torturous. Things got worse from there. He started messaging me relentlessly again, saying we needed to talk. When that didn't work, he started leaving letters in my locker. At first they were angry, telling them I made him do what he did, and he was only reacting to my actions because I ignored him. I was pulling him away and I made him do it. Then they were pleading that he loved me and he just wanted to talk to me and he couldn't forget about me. I didn't tell my parents about any of this. They were helicopter parents who had just given me a bit of freedom I desperately wanted, and I didn't want to prove them right by telling them what happened. I didn't tell my theater friends because they liked John, and they were for the most part my only friends. They just thought John and I had gotten into an argument and weren't talking to each other. John still came to our hangouts, and he would always find a way to touch me, sit next to me, our knees touching, leaning over me to talk to someone else. His letters started acting like everything was okay. He would refer to conversations I had with the group like they had been conversations between him and me. He was pretty popular, and I was about to find out he had lots of loyal little followers. High school mob mentality. Gotta love it. People I didn't even know started coming up to me in the hallways asking why I was being a bitch and not talking to him. He'd use other people's phones to call me. When I picked up and heard it was him, I would immediately hang up. Sometimes I think he would send out these randos to see if I was telling anyone what happened. He even got teachers hooked into it. One teacher pulled me aside after class and told me John had come to her very upset, and she thought it was a good idea if John and I sat down together and had a talk. I declined, saying I didn't think it would be a good idea. After pestering a couple more times and saying John was really upset, she finally let it go. If we had any classes together in the following years, the very first day, he would make sure to stay after with the teacher to talk about our problematic relationship and how he was very hurt by me and couldn't be placed into groups with me, still sitting behind me every chance he got. When musical season came around, I did stage crew. I can act, but I sound like a dying cat whenever I try to sing and have two left feet. And guess who else joined? You guessed it, John. Stage crew was on the weekends. We built the sets. Some students made costumes and I was the prop master, and it was relatively unsupervised. I could tell you many stories about John during stage crew, but honestly, it would be way too long, so I'll tell you one. He got the other stage crew boys to start calling me tight pants, as I wore a pair of tight sweatpants to crew one day. Threw them out that very night. The props were in the school attic. You needed to go up to the third floor and walk down two long hallways to get to it, and the lights were usually off as it was the weekend. Each hallway has a set of locked doors at the end, so I would have to get the key from the tool closet, walk to the end of the hallway, unlock the door, walk another hallway, and unlock the door to the attic. I walked down the first hallway pretty quickly, as dark empty school hallways are always rather creepy, and was fiddling with the lock, feeling like I was being watched. Right as I unlocked the door, I felt an arm snake around my waist, picking me up, and a hand wrapped against my mouth. I started squirming and screaming and nailed him with my elbow and was let go. John was kneeled over clutching his stomach, and another crew kid was bent over laughing hysterically. They had been hiding where the lockers ended, and the door started waiting for me, knowing I would have to walk down there to get to the attic. "What the heck is wrong with you?" I yelled, trying to rein in tears. The last thing I wanted was for John to see me cry. "Oh, come on, Nikki. It was just a joke. We wanted to scare you," the crew guy said, still laughing. "Yeah, Nikki, don't be such a tight pants." John started laughing now too. I stormed off without another word in the attic, locking the door behind me. I was crying all the way, hearing shouts down the hallway. "It was just a joke, Nikki. We're sorry," followed by more laughter. All that, rumors started circulating that I gave John a blowjob at the cast party, that we had sex in the tool closet during stage crew, etc. Sarah, the theater friend who I didn't talk to much anymore, came up to me at school one day and told me that John was saying some pretty messed up things with the theater boys, some of whom also did stage crew. He would relate to them in detail what he did to me, saying things like she had the tightest you-know-what, and at this point, Sarah was so uncomfortable she stopped hanging around them as much and felt the need to tell me. Now I had randos coming up to me, not only calling me a bitch and also all kinds of names. I had enough. I wrote a letter to John telling him I didn't want to hear my name ever come out of his mouth, and wrote down all the things I heard he was telling people and said that I would report him if he didn't stop. Finally, things got better. No more letters from him, only an occasional person would call me a name in the hallway. It was all good until one day I was walking to my parked car in the pouring rain. My school sucked and didn't have parking for students, so you had to walk to the nearest shopping plaza where everybody parked their cars. And Johnny drove by in the opposite direction. Noticed him staring, but he was driving in the opposite direction like I said, so I wasn't too worried until a minute later or so I saw him pulling into the plaza as I was walking into it. He rolls down his window and asked if I wanted a ride to my car, which was literally one parking lot away, which we knew was designated student parking, and I was already sopping wet, so offering to drive me there was pointless. I said, "No thanks," and kept walking, and he kept driving slowly next to me. When we get to the actual lot, I sprint to my car and jump in. I think he's gone, but when I go reverse, he has his car right behind me, sandwiching me in. He motions at me to roll down my window, and I do, trying anything to just get him to go away. He yells out his window, "I love seeing you wet," and I flip him off, laying on my horn to attract attention. He laughs, rolls back up his window, and speeds away. The only time I heard from him in high school was once when he asked if I had shown him some letters, which I had shown one or two to my boyfriend at the time, but that's a whole different story. And after prom, when he left me a drunk voicemail saying I was a beautiful woman and he still loved me. There are more stories, one of which happened while I was babysitting during college and walked by his house while he was home. but this post is already really long, and I think you get the sense that John made the high school hell for me. This happened over the course of 8 months, about 10 years ago when I was 14. My parents had sent me to a private Catholic girls' school for grade 9 because I was on a slippery downhill slope and needed straightening out, I guess. My parents are extremely overprotective, and I think the worst of my bad behavior was cheating on a math test and hanging out with kids who smoked pot. But whatever. I was willing enough to go to the school because a few of my best friends from elementary school went there too. We had to take a long bus ride to and from every day, and I think it took about 40 minutes each way. We live in Canada, where school uniforms are not very common, so 4 teenage girls in schoolgirl outfits probably stuck out quite a bit. We were also pretty obnoxious, with a lot of inside jokes and shrieking and laughing. We played games on the bus to pass the time, like charades. Yes, on a bus, and some other imaginative pastimes. After a while, we began to notice a man who would always sit near us whenever he was on the bus. He was quite creepy looking, and even at the time we thought, he looks like a perv. He wore the gross 80s wire-rimmed glasses and a long black trench coat and carried a briefcase. His hair was unremarkable, a mousy brown blonde, and he had a doughy face with beady eyes. He was also very chubby and wore these tight short khaki pants that showcased every lump, nook, and cranny. These pants also particularly accentuated what we called the bulge. You can guess what we're talking about. He was very lumpy in the groin area, and we thought it was both gross and hilarious. So every time this guy got on the bus, he would make a beeline for us. If we were sitting in the back, he would sit in the back. If we were sitting in the front, and he sat near us, we would always move to the back to get away from him, but he would follow us. He was always uncomfortably close and would face us whenever possible, legs spread. It was weird and gross. We could tell he was listening to all of our conversations because he would chuckle and smile with his eyes closed. We always laughed about how creepy he was, but didn't think too much of it until he started getting a little bit more obvious. There was one time in particular that I didn't find funny, and it really skeeved me out. The bus was crowded, so my friends and I weren't able to sit together. I got a seat that faced the center of the bus, and some passengers had to stand in front of those seats, holding on to handle things that dangled from the ceiling. So guess who gets on and stands right in front of me? The bulge. His crotch was essentially right in my face, and his knees were almost touching mine. After a while, I noticed that his bulge grew bulgier, and he was subtly thrusting in the direction of my face. I looked up and saw he had his head thrown back and his eyes closed. I glanced around in horror, but no one seemed to notice anything. I wasn't able to move at the time, so I just held onto my backpack and tried to not look at him. One day before school, my friends and I got into a bus that was basically empty. We sat up front by the driver and were dismayed when the bulge got on and sat by us. As usual, we picked up our stuff and headed to the back where, also as usual, he followed us. We ignored him and carried on our conversation until he started rummaging in his briefcase. He pulled out a piece of paper and held it towards our group. We all stared at him for a few seconds before I, being the closest, grabbed the paper and he got off at the next stop. It was a letter from him, saying that he was a writer and that we girls had inspired him to write a novel about us. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it, but I remember it pretty well. The leader of our gang was to be called Booster Girl, a schoolgirl or superhero combo with red hair and braces, describing one of my friends who flew around in her schoolgirl outfit saving lives. The rest of us were her sidekicks. He said he had been listening to us for some time and loved how each of us had unique qualities and dedicated a paragraph to each of us by physical description. For example, the pretty girl with the brown hair. Me was the outgoing one. The studious one with the curly blonde hair was the cautious one. He talked the most about the Booster Girl, though, the curious one. Then he thanked us for helping him get over his writer's block. I think there may have been some inappropriate stuff in the letter that we didn't understand at the time, because our teachers called the police when we showed them the letter. We had to give statements and describe him so that they could find him and make sure he wasn't planning anything. An undercover cop rode with us on the bus for about a week, but the bulge never came back on the bus again. At this point, I might say, so creepy bulge man, let's not meet. But I did meet him again, which is what inspired me to write this post. I still live in the same city and was taking the train into work one morning a few weeks ago. As with most cities, the trains are very crowded in the morning, so it wasn't unusual that there was a man standing very close to me. I was on my phone pretty much the whole ride and didn't really look up. After some of the people got off the train, he stayed really close to me, despite there being enough room for him to get me some space. I even remember thinking, man, buddy, back up. There came a point where I had to move out of the way for some other people as the doors were opening, and I looked up straight into the beady eyes of the bulge. He looks basically the same, still with the trench coat, briefcase, and ill-fitting pants, but his hair is gray now. He was staring at me, then gave me a creepy little smile and walked off the train. I haven't seen him again. It started during my sophomore year of college in my first semester of living on campus. I commuted about 25 minutes home for my freshman year, and after taking a break from school during the fall of sophomore year, realized I wanted to go back and get the full experience. My roommate was in a fraternity, and as soon as we met, he started asking me to hang out with them. I figured it couldn't hurt, and they offered me a bid. I reluctantly joined, and I figured if I took the bid, I could always leave, but if I declined, I'd regret not trying it out and seeing what it's really like. Luckily, most of the guys I joined with were the same way. The frat was dying off and needed numbers, so they took in anyone they could get, and most of us weren't too invested in it. As we go along the pledge process, the big/little assignment starts to approach. For those who don't know, this is one of the weirder traditions or rituals in Greek life. Every pledge gets assigned a big brother and is taken into one of the chapter's many family lineages. Sorority girls obsess over this kind of thing a lot more, but frats still do it too. The way pairs are determined is through each pledge handing in a list of their top 3 preferred brothers, and each brother handing in a list of their top 3 preferred pledges. Then pairs are made in a way that makes everyone as satisfied as possible. I copped out and put 2 guys as number 1. Like I said, this frat was just glad to have us along, so a lot of the pledge process was about making us happy and keeping us around rather than humbling us. The reason I put 2 was that there was one brother who I thought would be a good fit for me, and another who I could tell really took it to me. But I didn't think he'd be as good a fit. The one I wanted was older and had seniority, so I figured he'd get me. But nope, other guy John did. I didn't take it too seriously anyway, so I was fine with it. After that, John always wanted to hang out. Actually, even leading up to the big little decision, he was starting to invite me to drink at his dorm a lot. But now, we started to be together all the time, and I started seeing less and less of my pledge bros. I never quite felt fully comfortable around John. There were guys I hung out with a lot less who I felt a lot more natural around. But I could tell he liked hanging out, and I never saw a reason to blow him off. He would always pressure me to drink a lot, but I didn't think it was too weird because sometimes I did that to my friends who were lighter drinkers too. But the difference was I wasn't a light drinker. He would just encourage me to get wasted. One night, when we were hanging out, he convinced me to drink more than I should have, and I ended up passing out on his couch with my shoes on. A lot of you know it's pretty common in college to write on someone who passes out with their shoes on, and when I woke up in the morning, I wasn't surprised to see Sharpie on me. The problem was it wasn't just a couple of drawings on my face. He lifted my shirt and written all over my stomach, chest, and arms, and even on my legs, up to or maybe even past where my shorts stopped. And he was the only person there, so it's not like he was doing it for other people's entertainment. Another night, he brought me to a small party at the on-campus apartment of a girl he'd been friends with for a few years, who was obviously interested in me. After everybody left the party, she wanted me to stay, and I had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen then. But it didn't go the way I planned. John stayed too, and she started making out with both of us in her kitchen. I saw where it was going, and I know a lot of other guys would be cool with this, but I wasn't, so I decided to leave. And I figured John would have no reason to care if I left. He'd have her to himself, but he was obviously disappointed and tried really hard to get me to stay. Pretty soon, housing registration was about to start. John asked me what my plans were, and I told him I was planning on living with a few of the guys I was pledging with. We'd had these plans for a while. I could tell he wasn't happy about it. He told me we were never going to get put into one of the apartment-style dorms unless we had an older student, him, registering in our group, that I should kick somebody else out on the group so we wouldn't get stuck in a smaller dorm. I told him I couldn't do that. On registration day, my buddy calls me and says, "Hey, John just called in, said that you're not living with us next year. He says you're registering with him." The registration system at my school was hectic, and they were obviously trying to cause last-minute confusion to make sure I didn't live with him. His plan didn't work, but we screwed up on our own, and we're all left in apartments with people we didn't know. I ended up switching into an open spot in an apartment with a few brothers, and sure enough, John found out and made his way in there. Summer came and I didn't give much thought to the upcoming semester, but it did cross my mind more and more as time went on. I had a bad feeling about living with this kid. He actually came to my state, the state where our university was located and about 3 to 4 hours from his state, to visit about halfway through the summer. He stayed at my house and his attitude was pretty strange for the entire 3 days. My mom tried to make conversation with him and he didn't really reciprocate at all. He would usually just look her up and down in a really odd and vaguely threatening way, and then give one-word answers to anything she was saying. One night during his visit, we met up with one of our buddies who also lived nearby and was in the same frat as us. John actually pledged with this kid, and I guess he stayed at his house the previous summer when he visited. When we met up, our buddy didn't drink. I had a few beers and John got pretty drunk. We all went to Walmart and walked around because we couldn't find much else to do, and at one point, when we were all joking around, John reared back and punched the back of my head pretty hard out of nowhere. He wasn't drunk enough to be this belligerent without knowing what he was doing, but I noticed that he had a habit of using alcohol as an excuse to be aggressive with people. I didn't want to escalate the situation in the middle of Walmart, but our friend asked him why he did that, and he said, I didn't love him as big enough. At this point, I knew something was wrong with this kid, and I didn't want to live with him, but everybody else in the apartment was my friend, and I figured it was better than moving somewhere else. I was wrong, and this is where things get really bad. All 6 of us moved in, and it was 2 guys to a room. Of course, John takes the one I'm in. During the first few days back, he kept up this habit of hitting me in the back of the head when he was drinking and then pretending he didn't know what he was doing. But after the second or third time, I got in his face and told him to stop. One of the first few nights after everybody was officially moved in and settled, but before classes started, we decided to buy a 30-pack and drink as a group to break in the new place. We were all joking around and I made a simple joke that made him mad. I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't even at his expense. He told me not to say again, but I said it again because I was tired of him trying to tell me what to do. That's when he punched me in the jaw. I punched him back and it ended up turning into a fight. He started losing and that's what made the calculated move of grabbing my head, pushing me down, and punching the same spot he'd hit me a few times before. I'll admit at this point I was losing and I was scared I was going to lose consciousness. Luckily, my roommates broke it up. They put us in separate rooms, but he still wanted to talk to me. The last thing I wanted to do was talk to this kid, so I went for a walk around campus. At this point, it was about 3 a.m. Well, he decided to follow me around campus. I turned around and told him to go back to our apartment, and he did. I went to the farthest point on campus from our apartment, called my mom and told her she had to get me out of there and that I couldn't sleep in the same room with John. He called me about 3 or 4 times after I hung up with her, and I finally answered. He asked me where I was, and I told him I didn't want to talk. He said he didn't want to talk, he just wanted to make sure I was good. I knew I had a ride coming anyway, so I gave in and told him where I was. I didn't want him to keep calling me or look for me and find me without me knowing about it first. Within 10 minutes he was there, and he sat down on my left side. We were mostly silent, but suddenly he reached around my back to my right pocket and unclipped my pocket knife. At this point, he started alternating between fake laughing and fake crying, telling me he just wanted to be the best big brother possible, and waving the knife everywhere. I knew I was bigger and probably stronger than him, but he was crazier and the only one with a weapon, so I found myself scared shitless of another person and for my life, for pretty much the first time in my life. I already knew he was crazy, but this is when I knew he was basically a full-on sociopath. The lack of any real remorse for what he just did at the apartment, combined with this desperate acting job, made me realize he was very dangerous. I told him I had a ride coming, and he raised the knife and said that whoever was taking me home was giving him a lift back to the other side of campus. My mom rolled up and I jumped in the passenger seat and told her to speed off. He came at the car, but we made it off campus. I stayed home for a week and drove to school, and I did a lot of thinking about what to do next. I knew this kid was a real nut job, and I knew he had some weird obsession with me. I also knew he had to be stopped. But he was a good student with a good reputation. And so far, the worst incident had no witnesses, really. My main options were to let him win and drive to school for the rest of the semester, or pretend I forgave him, move back in, and expose him when I got the chance. I chose the second one. When I came back, he gave me an insincere apology while trying to look like he was about to break down in tears, and told me the week I was gone was really hard for him. I don't think he knew how strange that seemed. Throughout the rest of the semester, several disturbing incidents occurred. This is already pretty long, so I'll just share the worst of it. First off, he followed me everywhere, in and out of our room and whenever I tried to leave the apartment. He would stay up until I went to sleep, and he would go to sleep, or pretend to go to sleep at the same time. One night, I decided to test it when 4 or 5 of us who lived in the apartment were watching a movie. I abruptly left, went into the bedroom, and changed into clothes I'd normally sleep in. Even though he seemed pretty into the movie, he followed me and started changing and getting ready for bed when he saw me changing. But instead of going to bed, I went back out into the living room and started watching the movie again. He waited in the room for me to come back, and sure enough, after 10 minutes or so, he was back out watching the movie with us. He'd follow me around parties too, to the point where my pledge brothers would let me know when they were ready to leave, and we'd all sneak out together so he couldn't follow us. Maybe the most disturbing thing that happened was when I noticed that the photo count on my iPhone was way lower than it used to be. When I looked through my pictures, I noticed that a lot were gone. None of them were pictures I saved from the internet or pictures I took when I was hiking or anything like that. They were all pictures that had my other friends in them. I don't know when this happened or how, but I had obviously previously noticed him eyeing my phone when I put in my passcode. One night when the party was ending, a few of us stayed around and hung out. I spent most of the semester relatively sober in case he tried anything, but that night I got pretty hammered. I don't know what prompted it. Out of nowhere, he grabbed me by the throat and jacked me against a wall. Looking in his eyes, I saw that same glaze I did during the knife incident. I pushed him off and he walked out. My friends and I went to the late night food spot on campus, and we were waiting in line when he found us. He pulled me aside, grabbed my hand, and sliced my thumb open with the knife, and then pressed our thumbs together like some sort of forced blood brother ritual in a bad movie, and then acted like nothing happened. Right then, I got a call from one of the brothers who lived in our main party spot, where we'd just come from, saying he saw John choking me and asking me what was up. I went back to their place, and they said they saw blood pouring down my hand. These were pretty much the 2 top dogs in the frat, the president and the vice president. And I never saw them scared like this. They told me I had to sleep at their place tonight, and they weren't going to let me leave until the next day. That night, John called me about 25 times, left threatening messages, and told me he was going to mess up the apartment if I didn't come back that night. The next morning, I walked in to find a giant hole punched in the wall above my bed. Finally, towards the end of the semester, I decided to bring all of this up to the aforementioned mutual friend from the summer. He lived in the apartment with us, but he was never home and had no idea what was going on. Keep in mind, this kid was really close with John before I met either one of them, so I didn't know how he'd react once I told him. But as I told him the story, he looked more scared than I was. When I finished, he told me that John had shown the same pattern with him over the last couple of years, and it only got worse and worse, which is why he was glad John decided to room with me, and also why he was never in the apartment. When our conversation was winding down, John knocked at the door. When we let him in, he looked genuinely concerned for the first time since I met him. I don't know if he just read the looks on our faces or if he was listening in the whole time. After that, I went out to a party. John followed us around the whole time and didn't let either one of us out of his sight, so we snuck out early and went back to the apartment to keep talking about what was going on. After 10 minutes or so, John bursted in the room and went after our friend. He pinned him down on a bed, got on top of him, and started strangling him. Before any real damage was done, I pulled him off. We went to our campus police with other witnesses who had been building up as alibis throughout the semester, and he was immediately detained and then kicked out of school. He called me unexpectedly from a new number about 4 months later to apologize, but ended up just rattling off excuses for a few minutes. I didn't know what to say, so I hung up. That's it. It's a lot harder for me to trust people I meet now, and sometimes I come up with pretty screwed up theories about people if they seem a little off or a little too friendly. Other than that, I came out relatively unscathed. This is a long post, but a completely true incident that I experienced this past weekend. I feel that each detail I included is important to the story. This past Friday, I, 27 male, fell asleep around 8 p.m. after work. When I woke up around 9 p.m., I decided it was too late to go out, so I made a plan to run to the gym down the street instead for a late night workout. The small all-men's gym is just about a mile down the road. It was empty and dark inside, but the owner had given me the door code to get in. However, for whatever reason, the code was not working and I could not get in the gym. I still wanted to get a workout in, so I decided to just extend my run and head up to the local middle school playground and do some pull-ups on the monkey bars instead. I figured it was better than no workout at all. I got to the block that the middle school was on and began walking down towards the playground. On the way, I passed two young girls walking the opposite way. I would guess they were maybe 11 or 12. They were silent and looked at me nervously as we passed. Understandably so, as I'm a reasonably large man standing at 6'4", and it was almost 10 p.m. at night on an empty street. I live in a little suburban town of about 12,000 people with little crime. It is a dry town and mostly larger residential homes. The town is only 2 miles across and has a very safe family feel. Most of the residents are upper-class families here to take advantage of the great school system. Despite the reputation of safety the town has, I thought it was much too late and dark out for these two young girls to be wandering the streets alone, as creeps can show up anywhere, anytime, something I would soon enough witness to be true. I hope they are heading home, I thought to myself. I then got to the playground attached to the middle school. The playground is on the corner of the block with an alley leading to a parking lot behind the school, separating the playground from a local high-speed line going into the nearby city about 10 miles away. The high-speed line is built underground with an open top and high walls topped off with a chain-link fence to keep pedestrians from falling in. There is a bridge to cross the tracks below and then another street on the other side of the tracks from the school, running parallel to the rails, with one way going into the downtown business district and the other way going into a residential neighborhood. The young girls turn onto the street going towards the neighborhood away from downtown. I did one set of pull-ups on the monkey bars and was resting when I noticed a white pickup truck with the headlights cut and a raised cab with blacked out windows covering the bed of the pickup truck, moving slowly past the middle school in the same direction the girls were going moments before. I found this very suspicious, and even more so once the truck stopped directly in front of the playground, almost as though the driver or passenger were checking it out. I stared at the truck, wondering what was going on, when I then noticed that there was a man walking about 20 feet behind the truck in the same direction. As we passed the stopped truck, the window of the truck rolled down and I could see there were two men in it. I clearly saw the men walking, look over, and made a keep going forward hand signal to the driver or passenger, who followed his directions and started moving again, creeping slowly along with the headlights cut just as they were before. I watched as they crossed the tracks and saw the man on foot go right on the parallel road along the tracks towards downtown, while the truck went left on the same street towards the residential neighborhood in the same direction the young girls had gone less than 3 minutes before. What the heck did I just witness? I thought to myself as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. To me, it seemed like the truck and man on foot were following the young girls, stopped at the playground to see if they went there, and kept going when they only saw me doing pull-ups. I felt sick to my stomach. I tried to think of what else these men could have been up to. Looking for a lost dog? No, they weren't calling out and were driving much too slowly. Making a drug deal? Maybe, but what kind of a drug deal goes down at a fairly well-lit school area? Also, the man on foot signaling the truck forward and then going opposite ways down the next cross street did not make sense for a drug deal. In my head, I thought at best what I saw was some kind of drug deal. At worst, it was predators stalking two young girls in hopes of abducting them. I decided to follow the man on foot to find out. I followed him as he walked along the wall separating the sidewalk from the tracks below. On the other side of the street were a church and some office buildings. He was walking slowly and texting somebody on his phone. I turned around and saw the truck had stopped again about 2 blocks up the road in the opposite direction. The man on foot then completely stopped as I approached him. I couldn't be sure as to whether he realized I was following him, so I approached him in the most casual way possible. The man looked to be in his early 30s, stood about 5'10", with a slouch and had curly hair with a noticeable scar going down the side of his head through his hair. From the moment I began speaking to this man, I could tell he was very nervous. The way he acted and talked made me even more suspicious up until the conclusion of our conversation. Admittedly, my adrenaline was going, so I do not remember the conversation word for word, but below is how it went down. Me: "Hey, what's up, man? What are you doing?" "Not much. Just hanging out." "Just hanging out, huh? Where are you going?" Just going for a walk," he said. "I saw you signal to that sketchy truck back by the playground. That was kind of weird. What's up with that?" "Nothing at all. I just waved to them as I walked by." "You didn't just wave to them. I saw you made a hand signal for them to keep going." "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't know them." Me, more annoyed: "I'm not stupid. I clearly saw you signal to them. I know that you know them. Just tell me what you were really doing out here, because that was very suspicious." He very nervously starts walking away from me now. I'm not up to anything, he said. Walk and talk with me about it. Me, putting a hand on this man's shoulder to stop him. No, stop. Tell me what you are up to right now. You're acting extremely weird and it's making me nervous. I know you're up to something, so just tell me the truth. I don't care if you're buying drugs. I do them myself as well sometimes. P.S. I only smoke weed, but I was trying to get him to open up. Creep, in a very nervous voice. Dude, I'm not up to anything, man, I swear. I'm a good Christian man. I swear. Points to the church behind me across the street. Me, as suspicious as ever and in an angry voice now. I didn't ask what your religion was or whether you're a good person. I asked what the heck you and that sketchy truck were up to. Now, do you want to tell me, or should I call the police and have them come and ask you? You can call the police because I'm not up to anything. Leave me alone, please, man. I'm scared. The man then turned to start walking away again, faster this time. I admit that I was quite angry at this point, as I knew I was clearly being lied to, and this guy was definitely up to no good. I push him, not very hard, with one arm to get him to stop. The dude loses his balance and almost falls over, but then immediately starts sprinting away from me down the street. Turns the corner and then continues to sprint into the downtown business district, passing right by the few other pedestrians on the street. There was no reason for me to chase him, so I lost sight of him as he ran away. I looked back and the truck down the road that was stopped at the beginning of the confrontation was gone. Then take out my cell phone and call the non-emergency police line to report everything I had seen. The police thanked me and sent a patrol car to the area by the middle school. When I told my girlfriend about what happened, she was very upset with me for following and confronting the man. However, after what I saw, I am still convinced that I witnessed 3 men stalking the young girls with the intent to do them harm. I cannot come up with any other explanation as to what could have possibly been going on. Seeing how nervous the man was talking to me, paired with how he lied and then took on running, only further convinced me of what I saw. I followed my gut instinct and took action. I would do it all again. However, I would have called the police before confronting the man myself if I could redo the whole thing. My girlfriend's concern was for my safety, although I was much bigger than the man and made sure he was at least arm's length from me at all times. He could have been armed, so I understand my girlfriend's concern. At the very least, I hope that I stopped a possible crime. As for the creep that ran away from me, let's not meet again. I used to live in a beautiful yellow house on the East Coast with my family. My father moved us around a lot as kids, but at the time that I was around 12 or 13, we were fixing to move into this one. It was an old house, almost a century old. There was a lot of manual labor to be done before we could bring our belongings over. My grandma owned a home right down the street, a massive 6-bedroom, and she let us sleep there while we did the work necessary to get our house ready. The yellow house was naked and ugly on the inside. So far, the focus had been gutting the basement and getting rid of all the 70s wallpaper and shag carpet. All we'd brought over so far was some cutlery for impromptu meals and fix-up supplies. It gave off a creepy vibe. The previous owner, an older woman, had died in the home due to her age. The realtor was obligated to tell us that when we bought it. I was 13 or maybe 12. I'm not sure. Either way, I was a bit behind the curve on self-confidence. I had, and still have now at 20, a massive anxiety problem. I got a twinge of discomfort when my mother told me, "Honey, stay here for a little bit. I have to bring your brother to Grandma's. The doors are all locked. Just lock the front one behind me." I'm not sure how long it took for what happened to happen between then and my mom leaving. It had to have been 20 minutes at least. My grandma wasn't very far, but my mom loved to talk, so the simplest visit could take upwards of an hour. I was in the kitchen when a man drove into my driveway, used a key to get into my front door, and walked in. He was about mid-40s, but possibly younger, with shit hygiene, a huge head of curly brown hair and a long beard, and wearing a getup of cargo shorts and a blue Hawaiian shirt. I don't remember his shoes, but then I wasn't really looking at the ground. I was, however, looking like a deer in the headlights. I will never forget the words he said first. "Ah, it's okay. My grandma used to live here. You look so afraid. It's alright." He was inching into the apartment slowly. With some quick thinking, I grabbed a little knife from the cutlery drawer and hid it behind my back, praying I wouldn't have to use it. I didn't know how to use it. "This is my house now. You can't be in here." He was ignoring me. "Just over there is where we kept the Christmas tree," he said, pointing towards the living room. "And that's a hell of a stove. I used to cook all the time on that stove. Still getting closer to the home inch by inch. I wanted to cry. I wanted to pull out my phone and call my mom to come back. I wanted my mom to pull into the driveway and fix it. I flashed the knife. "Get out or I'm calling the police," I said. He put his hands up like a surrender and backed out the way he came, facing me the entire time. "Thanks for your time," he said as he walked out the door. I bursted into tears as he drove off, unsure of what really even happened. I called my mom and she of course flipped out and got home within 5 minutes. I don't know if that guy was actually an old resident of the house. He had a key after all, related to the woman who passed, or a mixture of both with creepy intentions. From the ages of 2 to 10, I spent nearly every weekend with my sweet grandma. Grandma's house wasn't bad to me. I found the overgrowth charming and the neighborhood she lived in fun because of the eccentric people. Naturally, I didn't realize until I was much older that Grandma lived in the ghetto of town, possibly one of the worst. She would take me with her to go on errands and to eat, and I was always happy to do so. One day at age 4, Grandma told me that she had to go to the store to get a single thing, an ingredient that she was missing for dinner. The nearest large market was just down the road. It was a handy Andy, big for the small strip it was contained within. I went with Grandma in her silver Saturn, the seatbelt pressing me firmly into the passenger seat. When we arrived at the store, Grandma decided that she didn't need to park. She told me that she would be back in just a second and that I could just wait for her in the car. She parked the car at the very front of the store and locked me in, then left to fetch what she'd come for. A minute into her leaving, little me turns to see somebody running at the passenger side door. It was the middle of the day, and the sun was hot and the sky was clear enough to where it shone everywhere. A skinny Hispanic man, his curly, wispy beard all over the place, had nearly thrown himself at the door and started to pull on the handle, trying desperately to get in. I didn't know how to react. I only stared at him. When he realized that there was no way for him to get in, he looked up and we met eyes. Immediately, he began smiling and started gesturing to the lock on my side, trying to bid me to unlock the door, nodding and smiling. I may have been 4, but I wasn't an idiot. It just felt wrong. No matter how nicely this guy was smiling. I could only gently shake my head, all the while him pulling at the handle, pleading with me silently to open the door. Grandma came out and saw him, and I never heard her so fiercely scream at somebody. He darted off. Grandma didn't speak the entire ride home. I wonder what might have happened if I had unlocked the door. This is my story about being stalked. Dealing with this has been difficult, and throughout the ordeal I felt out of control, so I'm sharing this to gain control over my story. This story is long and it spanned over 2 years, so I've split it into parts to make it easier to read through. Several years ago, I moved abroad to begin a 2-year study course. When I arrived at my apartment, I met 3 of my roommates. Sam was funny and sarcastic, while Bella and Poppy were both nice, sorority-type girls. We decided to go out for dinner, and I offered to invite our 4th roommate in room 1C next to mine. Sam warned me not to invite her, saying she was odd. I was worried because I didn't want to live with a bunch of catty girls. How were they fighting in less than a day? I smiled and told Sam that she had made a bad first impression and I would invite her to get to know her better. Sam grumbled as I left the kitchen, approaching the door next to mine. I knocked and the door opened. A short petite girl with long brown hair and a childlike face stuck her head out. I introduced myself and invited her to dinner. The girl's face lifted at my invitation as she nodded in agreement. Our excitement about the new school year kept us lively as we arrived at the restaurant. I decided to befriend the girl in room 1C, since we were sharing a bathroom. I learned that her name was Nellie. We were the same age, from the same state, and in the same program. I ordered a Jack and Coke, and Nellie leant into me and asked if I actually drank alcohol. I nodded, thinking her question was weird. We were both in our 20s. Of course I drink. Nellie focused her attention on me while we ate. As I got to know Nellie, I kind of felt bad for her. She was born in Sri Lanka, but immigrated as a kid, and since she has an accent and a lisp, I assumed she was bullied. Nellie was different from me. She was very shy and claimed to not have hobbies or friends, but I figured that since we were in the same program, I could befriend her. I asked if she wanted to sit with me in class, and she happily agreed. I felt content knowing that I was befriending her, like I was doing a good deed. My first 2 weeks abroad went smoothly. I got used to my surroundings, made friends, and got along with my roommates. Sam, Bella, Poppy, and I would often cook and eat dinner together while chatting about our days. Nellie and I got along, but she was socially awkward. I made it my goal to befriend her, which was easy because we sat together and lecture every day. We even opened our bedroom doors in unison. I would open my door, then Nellie would open hers and ask me where I was going. One night, I left my room to go grocery shopping when Nellie's door opened and she asked to join me. I agreed, and she hurriedly put on her sandals and neon pink coat. I walked through the aisle. Nellie silently followed closely behind me. Eventually, I found everything I needed, but Nellie said she wasn't buying anything. After I paid for everything, we began to exit the store and the alarms went off. I stopped to show the security guard my receipt and he looked in my bags, confirming that I had not stolen anything. I didn't think much of this incident, but when I stood at the front of the store with Nellie for the 4th time as my bags were searched by security, a thought crept into my mind. The alarms never rang when I was alone or with friends. They only rang when I was with Nellie. I shook my head. Nellie couldn't be stealing. I was with her the whole time. She was a perfectly nice, normal girl, and I was rude to think anything contrary. The harmony in the apartment only lasted 2 weeks. One morning, I shuffled into the bathroom and saw the toilet was completely filled with 2 or 3 rolls of dry, unraveled toilet paper spilling onto the floor. However, what concerned me the most was a huge wad of hair that sat directly on top of the toilet paper. I knew then that it was Nellie who had done this. She was the only person with a bathroom key, and her hair color was a match. I tried to think of any reason that Nellie would do this. Maybe she clogged the toilet, then stuffed it with toilet paper to hide her business, but that didn't explain the wad of hair. I couldn't harp on the issue though. So I made a maintenance request to have someone unclog the toilet, and when I came home from class, it was unclogged. I studied for 2 hours before going back to the bathroom. I was annoyed when I found the toilet clogged again. Toilet paper, hair, and all. This obviously wasn't a mistake anymore, and now we were out of toilet paper too. I knew I had to say something, but I didn't want to directly confront Nellie about this awkward topic, so I sent a passive, non-aggressive text. Hey, if something goes wrong with the toilet, can you make a maintenance request right away, please? I sent the message, careful not to make it accusatory. I didn't want there to be tension with Nellie, especially since she still sat with me in class. She never acknowledged the situation, still opened her door with mine, hung out with me, and sat with me in class. For the next 2 months, I just dealt with the constant toilet paper and torn out hair. I tried sending more texts, but it didn't help. She would clog the toilet, I'd make a maintenance request, a staff member would clean Nellie's mess, and then she would do it again. Eventually, after 12 clogged toilets or so, I was so annoyed that I decided to confront her. Nellie, I know you're clogging the toilet and you need to stop. If you do it again, I'm going to report you. I pressed send as I walked to class. I decided that I wouldn't sit with her anymore. I had different friends to sit with who didn't clog my toilet. As I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte, I felt bad seeing Nellie sit down alone across the lecture hall. I promised myself that I'd still be friends with her and that everything would be fine. I was happy that the holiday break was soon and that Nellie never addressed me not sitting with her. My message had worked. She had stopped clogging the toilet and we were friends still. But I came home one day in early December and my nose scrunched in disgust. There was a sickly, sweet, rotten yogurt-like smell coming from her room. I didn't want to confront her so soon after messaging her about the toilet, so for 2 weeks I avoided the issue. I didn't address the issue until 2 weeks later when all of our food started to rot almost immediately after buying it. Bella, Sam, and Poppy were complaining about how maintenance hadn't found the source of what was causing our food to rot, when I brought up the horrible smell and an accompanying fly infestation. The girls went to go smell the hallway outside of her room and returned a minute later, coughing and gagging. We posited about what may be causing the smell when Sam brought up seeing Nellie at 2 a.m. skipping through the woods. Sam was heading back from the club and Nellie was skipping around like a possessed doll, according to Sam. As we spoke, Nellie entered the kitchen and everybody fell quiet. Sam bluntly asked Nellie what the smell in her room was and she just silently shrugged her shoulders. Annoyed by this, Sam stood up and grabbed her arm, guiding her into the hallway as the rest of us followed, covering our noses with our sleeves. Nellie claimed not to smell anything, but her eyes were darting rapidly between the 3 of us. Sam made a sarcastic comment towards Nellie as we returned to the kitchen without. Sam was a bit harsh and part of me felt bad for Nellie. At least Christmas would be relaxing. I spent 2 weeks at a friend's house with her family for Christmas. They were all welcoming, so I didn't miss home too much. My friend knew about Nellie, so she brought me scented candles for Christmas. When I returned to the apartment, I felt rested and equipped to face the new year. My January exams were online and pretty easy, so I was surprised when Nellie texted me asking if I would cheat with her on the final exam. I politely declined, and she asked if I would go to lunch the next day. I had no plan, so I accepted the invitation. I spent a lot of time with her, but she never actually spoke much, so despite everything, I wanted to get to know her better. Once we were at the restaurant, I racked my brain for things I could talk with Nellie about. Attempting to break the awkward silence, I asked her what her favorite show was. Nellie told me that she loves to watch Sophia the First. I was confused. Sophia the First is a Disney toddler show that came out when we were teens. Why was she watching a show for toddlers in her 20s? I didn't know how to expand on what she said, so I changed the topic and asked what her favorite hobby was. She giggled and said, "I do this a lot actually. I listen to you through the walls. They're so thin, I barely put my ear against them and I hear you talk to your parents every day." I tried to not look horrified as I sat there confused and a little bit scared. She started laughing. "You're like a mother, but I'm an aunt and we're sisters together." I smiled awkwardly and nodded. I had no clue what she meant by that or how to respond. In a desperate attempt to change topics, I asked her about her childhood in Sri Lanka. Nellie slammed her fists on the table, sending my rice flying off the plate. She yelled that she was not from there and I apologized, even though she definitely told me she was. Nellie began to laugh again. "I have plans for us tonight. We'll go to the graveyard and walk around. You'll be scared, but I'll have fun with you." Her eyes opened incredibly wide, and her mouth seemed to open more than usual. She was scaring me, and I didn't want to be rude, so I said I'd invite our other roommates too. At that, Nellie let go of her fork and quickly moved her hand onto mine. She insisted that we had to go alone. I pulled my hand back, attempting to hide my grimace, and started out a disingenuous maybe. She leant back slowly, rolling her head from one side to the other, and mumbled about how fun it will be. The rest of our lunch was silent. When we got back to the apartment, I said goodbye to her and went into my room. I didn't call my parents that night. I went to bed early, hoping to quell my anxiety and get some much-needed rest. The next day I did laundry and went shopping, and by 2 p.m. I was meal prepping for the week. I jumped when Nellie asked me to go to the movies with her. I hadn't heard her come into the kitchen, but there she stood, her head down and eyes turned up, staring at me. I declined her request, but she repeated her question. I politely declined once again, trying to offset her bizarre vibe. Nellie didn't respond and retreated back to her room, then left for the movies. An hour later, I went to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I gagged immediately. The smell was bad, but the sight was worse. The walls, floors, door, sink, and toilet were covered in smeared poop and blood. I could see distinct handprints. I closed the door, trying not to throw up. I was shocked that Nellie had done this, but my shock turned into anger as I messaged her. "What you did is weird and disgusting. You need to clean it and I'm going to report you." I pressed send. I no longer cared about being friends with her. I felt gross, so I went to our shower room next to the bathroom. But Nellie ruined that too. There was toilet paper shoved in the shower drain and wads of toilet paper crusted on the walls. I was livid at this point, but I had to wait until Monday to report her, so I lay down to take a nap. 2 hours later, I was awoken by Nellie slamming the front door. I heard her footsteps until her feet were visible through the crack under my door. I expected her to knock, but she didn't. Instead, she began to continuously chirp like a bird. She briefly paused, then began twisting my doorknob in unison with her chirps. I stood there unnerved as Nellie did this for 5 minutes. Then Nellie began to rapidly knock on my door and call my phone. 7 times she called, hung up, then called again, while still rapidly knocking. Nellie then began to ram her body into my door over and over again. The shock of it made me stumble back onto my bed. Then, as suddenly as it started, Nellie stopped, her feet still visible under my door. My phone buzzed and I slowly unlocked it, staring down in horror at Nellie's text. The cockroach screamed. "Why do this to me?" "Because you couldn't be positive in a negative situation," the doctor said. The doctor pulls off the cockroach's legs and it cries. The doctor has no choice. The cockroach must be killed and its family taken away. You are the funny cockroach. I was terrified as Nellie began to knock and chirp. I was scared to call the police because I was on a visa, and if they didn't believe me, I could be deported for making a false report. I texted Poppy and Bella, who heard everything. Nellie stood there for an hour straight, occasionally pushing her fingers through the crack under my door. When Bella's boyfriend arrived, his presence scared Nellie away. We met up and talked about what happened before going to bed. That night, I barely slept. I was too scared. I awoke the next day anxious about the previous night's events. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. However, as I peeked into the bathroom, its condition suggested otherwise. Charlotte and Reagan were skipping class, so I sat alone. I saw Nellie enter the room, bypass her regular seat, weave through the aisles, and inspect each row as she passed. I sank in my chair as she got closer, horrified by the realization that she was searching for me. With last night's memories fresh in my mind, I froze in fear when Nellie found me and robotically bent down to meet my eye line as she sat next to me with her mouth twisted up in a sinister smile. I did nothing as she sat next to me, too scared to move and worried that any tiny shift might cause her to attack. When the professor dismissed us, I shot up, frantically packing my things. Nellie asked where I was going and I lied to her, saying I was going to the cafe. I didn't want her to know where I was, so I went home for lunch and, as I stood in the kitchen, the door opened. "You weren't at the cafe." Nellie's eyes started up to me. She was looking at a knife on the table. I apologized and told her my plans had changed. My heart raced as I asked her if she liked the lecture. She didn't respond. She just stared with her head tilted and mouth agape. I asked again, but she still didn't answer. I faced her, afraid she'd used the knife on me. She glared so intently that her veins were protruding. She stood there for 10 minutes before leaving. Later on, I walked to the library and froze as I saw Nellie's pink jacket behind me. I turned to see her staring at me with vacant eyes. She follows me into the library, up to the 3rd floor, and then sat directly behind me. With her threat still fresh in my mind, I moved to a different spot, but she followed again. I tried again, but still followed. I was scared to be isolated in a library with her, so I decided to leave. I quickly wove through the bookshelves, desperately trying to reach the lobby, but she matched my pace. I was nearing a heart attack when I ran into my guardian angel, Sam. "Nellie's following me," I blurted out. Sam looked at her, who had stopped 5 feet behind me. Sam nonchalantly told Nellie to screw off. I was surprised when Nellie did just that. After Sam and I spoke for a bit, my phone buzzed. It was Nellie inviting me to the graveyard that night. Sam told me that I'd be smart to move out, and she was right. I needed to report Nellie and move out. It wasn't safe for me to live in that apartment anymore. I needed to get away. I went to Reagan's apartment as she was the closest person I had to family while I was abroad. She gave me refuge while listening to me retell the last 48 miserable hours of my life. She reassured me that I could stay with her, and as I held back tears, my phone buzzed. Sam texted that she needed help and to go to the apartment ASAP. I was hesitant to go back in there, but I couldn't just abandon Sam, so I grabbed my stuff and told Reagan I'd be back soon. I walked to my apartment and stared up at it, feeling a lot like the priest in the Exorcist movie. When I got to my door, I was immediately greeted by my 3 roommates' distraught faces. I followed them into the apartment, and my eyes grew wide as Sam pushed open the kitchen door to reveal a truly demonic sight. Huge amounts of congealed red and orange liquid pooled across the floor, leading beneath our table, where a small bird lay dead with its wings outstretched and its head missing. I felt sick. The windows don't open, so it didn't get in here by itself. Nellie had either found this bird and brought it into the kitchen, or killed and decapitated a living bird and then put it in the kitchen. I didn't like either of those options. I assured my roommates that I would report Nellie that night, and that's exactly what I did. I spoke to the school safety board and things moved quick. I discovered that Nellie had lied to us about her name and age. Officials in Hamzat suits came to clean the kitchen in Nellie's room. The board had me send them photos of me daily in case Nellie killed me and they had to identify me. I quickly moved out, and since Nellie avoided the other girls, they decided to stay. I declined to submit Nellie for expulsion because I felt bad for her and thought that moving would stop her obsession with me. I was incredibly misguided. I was happy that my new roommates were normal and no Nellie incidents had happened for 2 weeks. I did have a large uptick in random daily Facebook and Instagram follower requests from blank profile users. I knew who was behind it, but I was avoiding any Nellie-related thoughts. I was having night terrors, and the more I thought about her, the worse it got. I blocked another user as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte in an almost empty lecture hall. Charlotte nudged me as Nellie entered the room, bypassing her usual seat. I felt myself freeze up as she entered our row and began walking towards me, staring at me with her dead eyes. "Don't sit next to me," I said. Shocked by my bravery, Nellie responded by sitting 10 seats down from me, not breaking eye contact, and I considered that a win. After class, I went home and then walked to the store. I forgot to grab a cart, so I quickly turned around to fetch one and ran into someone standing directly behind me. It was Nellie. Did she follow me from my apartment? Does she know where I live? My heart stopped as I backed into another aisle and Nellie followed. I walked into another one, but she kept following me, matching my pace until I went to another aisle and she began to run. I ran away terrified, and she only stopped when I got to the security desk. Security offered to call the police, but I declined and gave them my email to send me the footage of Nellie chasing me. I had to report her, but since I still had class that day, I decided to report her the next day. 2 hours later, as I waited for Reagan to walk with me to class, I caught her staring at me across the street, but she didn't approach me and walked with the crowd towards the campus. Minutes later, Reagan found me and we headed to class together. I walked beside Reagan past the buildings and alleyways until a rock caught in my shoe and I bent down to fix it. Reagan switched to the right side of me to look at a billboard, and when I removed the rock, we began walking again. I turned my head to speak when Nellie jumped out of an alleyway and onto Reagan. Her hands were outstretched and clasped around Reagan's neck. Words can't explain how terrified I was. She let go immediately and Reagan grabbed my arm, walking forward. She began walking shoulder to shoulder with me, her head turned sideways at an unnatural angle. The look in her eyes were not human. Reagan told me to run and we both did across the street. Nellie paused but walked away, traffic stopping her from crossing. We stopped and Reagan leant against the fence as I bent over and covered my mouth, trying not to vomit. After a while, we continued our walk to class in silence. We made it to the lobby and headed for the staircase, but Nellie stood at the bottom. "I won't let her walk behind me," I said, voice shaking. Reagan nodded, and we followed a large crowd after Nellie walked upstairs, only to find her holding the door open for everyone. Nellie stared at me through the crowd until everybody but Reagan and I had passed through. "It's okay. You can go first," Reagan said while smiling at Nellie. I was shocked at how composed she was and even more shocked that Nellie listened. When she sat down in class, she tried to sit behind me, but somebody was saving the seat for his friend, so she left. I didn't pay any attention to that lecture. I sat there shocked and terrified while Reagan hunched low in her seat, rubbing her neck. I felt horrible for bringing Reagan into this Nellie crap. I knew that Nellie needed to be expelled no matter what. The next day, I reported Nellie to the Student Safety Board and they raised the issue with the disciplinary board. I submitted a lengthy report detailing everything Nellie had done. I included Reagan, Bella, Poppy, and Sam as witnesses and gave photographic evidence of the threats, the calls, the smeared poop and blood, clogged showers and toilets, and the stalking. The next week, I met with the disciplinary board to go over their conclusions. They informed me that they had reviewed my report, met with Nellie to give her a copy of my report, discussed my accusations, and came to a conclusion. They acknowledged that everything I reported was factual, but they didn't think Nellie had any malicious intent, so they would grant a no-contact order, but she wouldn't be expelled. I was completely perplexed by their conclusion and asked them what Nellie had said about all of this, but they refused to tell me anything. I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe she was given my full report, knew everything that I said, and knew the witnesses' names. The school put us all in danger, yet they wouldn't allow me to know if Nellie had even denied her actions. I was devastated. I felt my mind go numb. I knew at that moment they didn't care. They were going to prioritize a predator. So, with no other options, I agreed to the no-contact order. The worker tried to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that I wouldn't speak about what Nellie did to me or how the school dealt with my case, but I refused to sign it. The next day, I received an email confirmation that Nellie had agreed to the no-contact order, but I knew that meant nothing. Nellie wouldn't get help, and she would never stop stalking me. My sophomore year was plagued by a relentless pattern of Nellie stalking me from place to place, sitting next to me in class, standing next to me in hallways, and staring at me daily. Her actions were so unnerving and obvious that multiple strangers warned me about her. I reported these incidents every time they occurred, and the school always responded by stating they would remind Nellie of the no-contact order. They never took any further steps to help me. In sophomore year, Nellie found other roommates and, in them, new victims. She was evicted from an off-campus apartment, and her new roommates, who once sat with her, began to sit far away from Nellie. They looked terrified. They looked like me. Having incidents happen weekly and having to see Nellie daily made it impossible for me to move on. I was always in flight or freeze mode, terrified by what Nellie had done and still might do to me. I became a sunk-in, miserable, and defeated version of myself. I wanted revenge. a natural result of the boiling rage I felt, now at a constant simmer after Nellie was coddled by a university that failed to shell out even a minor consequence for the terror that she imposed on me. I wanted Nellie to suffer in the exact same way that she made me suffer. I knew if I had just grown a pair at any point in those early months, I likely could have saved myself and others from suffering. Nellie was likely stalking me from the moment I met her. I just hadn't realized it yet, and it weighs heavily on me to know that I played a large part in my own suffering. No matter what I write, I can't begin to recreate the evil that radiated off of Nellie. I have daily night terrors. I don't go into new situations, don't speak to new people, and I don't make friends. I'm not nice to strangers because I don't want to invite something like this into my life again. Revenge came on graduation day when Nellie's name didn't appear in the book of graduates. She had failed the second year. But despite everything, I couldn't help but think that I was a bad person for being content with Nellie failing. Maybe I was just happy that I could finally move on. This happened when I was 15 and totally reckless. I was with my best friend Alice and her neighbor Emily. We decided to try to enter the clubs with fake IDs after discreetly going out of the house by the window. After getting rejected by the security guys at the clubs because obviously we were not looking like 18 plus, we were wandering in the streets not knowing what to do. It was around 1 a.m. and the subway was closed and we didn't have enough money to get a cab. Plus, we really wanted to party and Alice wanted to find a new guy because she was heartbroken from her past boyfriend. The last club we tried to enter was into one of the areas that had a famous bad reputation in the city. It was in Lyon, France. Then suddenly a car stops next to us. The door opens and there are 3 guys inside. 2 of them turn their head and say, "Hey, pretty girls, come with us. We have everything you need to get some pleasure. We have drinks and smoke. Come." The one at the back looked really muscular and was really insistent. Alice then said, "Let's go, girls, it could be super fun." Then she whispered, "Please, I need some fun. I need a guy to turn that page." She grabbed Emily's arm and went into the car laughing. At this point, I was like, what the heck am I doing? I would rather die with my friends than die alone in the streets. We all entered. In the car, they're trying to flirt with us, but I'm petrified. We say that we're 17, and they tell us that it's the perfect age to party with them. After 15 minutes of them driving, I don't know where around the city, they say they want to get some drinks and they want to find a cool place. Alice is super happy. Emily and I are relieved they're going to drop us off in a public place like a bar or club. But they park the car in a car park in the middle of nowhere. We get out of the car and the guys take some bottle from the trunk, mix a lot of stuff inside the glasses, and then give them to us. The one who was driving stays in the car, hands on the wheel, not saying anything. The 2 other guys start to tell us really inappropriate things, that they're going to take us to a hotel, and that we all look like porn stars. They were around 35 and we were all 15. They insist on saying how they would be the best hit of our lives and how they would be in beds, etc. Emily whispers to me that we shouldn't drink, but act as if we were drinking because there might be something inside. Alice starts flirting back and tells me that it's kind of dangerous, but she likes it. At this point, they tell us they're not going to let us go unless we stay with them the whole night, and they ask me to drink insistently. I finally do it and I start to feel dizzy really fast. Everything is blurry around me and I think in a very incoherent way and it hurts my stomach. The guys are looking at me if I were prey and they were hunting. After 10 or 15 minutes feeling like this, I tell Alice that we should go and she doesn't look worried at all. I then think that I should sit inside the car, waiting for my fate to do its job. I open the front door and there's still the guy who drove in. He is listening to the radio and doesn't even look at me when I enter. I ask him, "Why aren't you with your friends?" He turns at me upset and says, "Hey, I don't know who you are and I don't want to know. You guys told us you were 17, but you look like my younger sister and she just entered high school. I don't know why my stupid friends are flirting with you, but I'm just waiting for them to stop and drop the 3 of you off in a public place. Once it'll be done, I hope I'll never see you again in my entire life." I was shocked and relieved. We stayed there, both of us, just listening to the radio and hearing the laughs of Alice at the bad sexual jokes of the muscular guy. I was so dizzy I was melting in my seat. After maybe 30 minutes, the driving guy said he wanted to go somewhere. Everybody came in the car. We sat in it and went for a 10-minute ride while the 2 guys were saying what they would do to us once we get to the hotel. Then the driving guy told him to shut up and that he was dropping us on this big place with lots of people. We gave the 2 guys some fake names for Facebook and some fake phone numbers and we finally got out of the car. The muscular dude who was at the back tried to grab Emily's arm, but she managed to run outside. They left. The driving guy looked at me just before and nodded at me. I was still super dizzy and eventually threw everything up. Emily didn't believe what just happened, and Alice was still laughing, saying that it was insane. It was like 3:30 or 4 a.m. now, and we finally found a real party after. But to those two guys that want to do I don't know what in a hotel, let's not meet again. Or, like the driving guy said, I hope I'll never see you again in my entire life. During the mid-late 2000s, I worked in a camera store with a photo lab. We had our fair share of gross, creepy customers that fancied themselves pro phototugs. They shot terrible amateur porn with bad lighting, unattractive models, etc. Our male coworkers usually stepped up to help these customers because the purse would stare at us, say borderline inappropriate things, or try to get us to look at their terrible porn with them. We had one guy who didn't actually shoot porn but was equally slimy. He attended porn conventions. Yeah, those are a thing, and would bring in a dozen or more rolls of film from these events. Every frame was him posing with the female porn stars. It wasn't just his appearance that was slimy though. There was something just off about him. He was really timid and talked super quietly, so you'd have to lean over the counter and get close to hear him, and he always reeked of too much cologne. The worst part about this guy, besides topping off my internal creep meter, was when he'd come in to pick up his pictures, he would spread them out across the counter. There were no nudes, so we couldn't stop him, and whoever was ringing him out had to help him pick out the best ones. It was so weird. To give you an example, which photo makes it look like we are together? Emphasizing together and drawing out the word in a nasty, slimy way while holding up 2 photos for the poor employee to choose between. He would then order enlargements of the best ones in 8x10 or sometimes poster size. We used to joke that he lived in his mom's basement and used the enlargements as wallpaper. We had a good laugh at it, but I get shivers down my spine when I think about how that's probably exactly what he did. When I first started working there, we had a coworker named Jeff who dealt with the porn convention guy. I was actually warned of one of my very first days there not to help and to let Jeff deal with him. I think there may have been issues with previous female employees, but I'm not sure. Maybe Jeff just had good intuition. I remember the sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach when we'd see him coming and Jeff wasn't around to help him. We'd actually play the not it game when we saw him in the parking lot. But a few years after I started, Jeff quit. We were all sad because we loved working with him. Then the porn convention guy came in and we were angry at Jeff leaving us, and now one of us had to help him. My friend Denise was store manager and became his designated employee helper person. Things were fine for a while. The weird guy actually liked working with Denise and specifically requested her every time he came in. It weirded her and all of us out, but we were all young and dumb and just went with it. One day I was printing his pictures and the last frame on the roll of film was a picture of Denise in the store. It almost looked like an accidental shot, like one that you take just to finish off the last frame on a disposable. Regardless, I didn't print it. Cut the frame off his negatives and package it up. Technically, I could have been fired for that but didn't care. Denise approached me later, saying the porn convention guy was upset when he picked up his film. He said one of his pictures was missing. I found the negative in the trash, showed it to her, and I wasn't fired. It happened again the next time he came in and every time after that. There was one picture of Denise at the end of one of the rolls of film. We always cut the negative out and played dumb when he asked about the missing photo. Eventually, somebody sold him a digital camera and we printed his pictures from a memory card. We couldn't just cut off the negative anymore. Instead, we edited the picture of Denise to look like crap. Too dark, washed out, bright pink. Whatever we felt like that day. He never said anything, but he always seemed disappointed when he was flipping through his pictures and got to the last one. This went on until Denise was promoted to assistant district manager maybe 2 years after Jeff left, and she had to travel between all the stores in the state. I became the manager of our store and had to help this creep. Karma sucks. Thankfully, I wasn't his type. Probably because I was a giant bitch to him and no images of me or any other employees showed up on his memory cards. One day, Denise is at our store for training and we see the porn convention guy in the parking lot. Denise runs to the back room and hides, and I go to help him like normal, gearing up my bitch mode. The first words out of his mouth were, "Where's Denise?" I reminded him of the upteenth time that she no longer worked here, but her car is here. I was speechless and just stared at him, jaw on the floor for what felt like 10 minutes while trying to think of something to say. Finally, words come out. "I'm not sure what she drives, but she's not here." She drives that blue Cavalier right there, and points at Denise's car. I'm seriously creeped out, grossed out, and completely dumbstruck. All I could say was, no it's not, like a stubborn toddler, and walk away. Guy didn't leave. He lingered at the front of the store for a half hour, pretending to look at picture frames. Denise hid in the back room until he left without buying a frame or saying a word. We called her boss, the district manager, and explained everything. He told Denise not to go back to our store, that he would handle our training from then on, but unfortunately the convention guy hadn't done anything illegal, and nothing he did would warrant us refusing his business, so we had to keep helping him when he came in. Next time he came in, there was a photo of her car on his memory card, which I deleted. Again, something I could get fired for, but who is he going to tell? Denise was basically my boss. Cue the recession, and our business was hit bad. Our district went from having 25 stores to 3. Most of the managers kept their jobs and moved to one of the 3 remaining stores. Denise became sales manager. I worked in the photo lab, and our store manager was a giant douche. We had a sales guy named Nick that was a big guy and a total hard ass. The first time we realized the convention guy was bringing his pictures to our store, Denise wasn't there. I went to print an order and saw his slimy face on my computer screen and just felt sick to my stomach. I told the manager and everybody about the guy and his fascination with Denise, and Nick said he'd help the guy from then on so nobody else would have to deal with it. Denise still drove the blue Cavalier, and the same thing started happening. When we would see him coming, she would hide in the back. Where's Denise? Not here. But her car is here. Not her car. Then he would linger in the store, sometimes for over an hour, hoping to catch a glimpse of her and leave without saying or buying anything. Called the cops once, but they said they couldn't do anything. The district manager still wouldn't allow us to refuse him service. We just continued to do what we could. Denise never worked alone, and we always made sure she was safe in her car at night before anybody drove away. Something we did for everyone anyways. It all came to head about 6 months after most of the stores closed. The porn convention guy is still in the store lingering. Denise is hiding, and he just strolls on through the door to the photo lab and into the back room where Denise was sitting. Nick and I followed and stood in the doorway, shocked as he stood there staring at her with beady little black eyes, smiling this creepy closed-lipped smile. No one said anything for what felt like ever. Finally, the store manager pushed through me and Nick in the doorway and tells the guy that he can't be there. The convention guy says nothing and shuffles his feet a bit, but still keeps staring at Denise. You could feel how horrified she was from across the room. The useless manager then says, "Sir, you have to leave. We have photo processing chemicals back here. It's against OSHA policy for you to be here." So this is the stupidest statement ever. By the way, totally true. Technically, that's why I shouldn't have been back there, but get the F out, you creep, was way more appropriate at the time. Anyways, the manager is essentially useless in this situation. Denise was almost in tears. I'm in shock, and Nick, well, he looked mad. It happened pretty quickly, but I swear Nick jumped over his 6-foot table and got in the convention guy's face, or more like towered over the cowardly little man. Calmly, quietly, but filled with rage and anger, Nick says, "Get the heck out and don't come back." The convention guy was practically pissing himself. He backed up towards the sales floor and walked backwards all the way out the door, visibly shaking the entire time. Nick stayed within inches of him until he was outside. We called the cops again, and they couldn't do anything. We called the district manager. Nick got a slap on the wrist for chasing off a paying customer, followed by a good job. Denise went home for the day. We of course walked her to her car, and the convention guy never came back to pick up his creepy enlargements. I like to think that every time he stares at the gap in his convention wallpaper, he remembers Nick towering over him, ready to smash his greasy bowl-cut covered head into the table. This happened in 2001 when I was 15. It was during the summer holiday, and I and my best friend and one of my cousins were in a state of permanent boredom. Not much to do in our small town. One weekend, we had managed to convince our parents to let us go on a camping trip on our own, just for 2 nights. We were planning to take the kayaks and make our way to a small island in archipelago and spend the day fishing and swimming. We were all pretty outdoorsy people, and it shouldn't be a problem. We had a great day, and as night approached, we decided to set up our tent and go to sleep. During the process of setting up the tent, my cousin Sophie told us about her last camping trip where she had been awoken by a curious moose outside of the tent, and we all thought it was hilarious to be scared of a moose. We grilled some fish over the fire before we went to bed. As we were all pretty tired, we fell asleep instantly. I woke up a few hours later when Bella, my best friend, sat up straight and pointed towards the entry of the tent. "I heard something," she whispered. We sat there listening, but the sound was gone, and after a while we fell asleep. Soon, I was woken up again by Sophie this time. "There's someone outside," she stated, her voice laced with the cold kind of fear that made me instantly wide awake. I tried to see or hear any sign of anybody being outside of our tent, but it took several minutes of staring into nothingness before I saw it. I moved very slowly, the light summer night allowing a shadow play on the thin canvas of our tent. It wasn't the shadow of a tree or animal, was it? It moved so slowly it was hard to know if you imagined it or if it was actually real. We could hear the opening and closing of our cool box and someone stepping on the coal around the fire pit. Bella gripped my forearm tight as she mimicked. "The knife?" Sure enough, we had left our knife outside, the one we had used for the fish hours earlier. We sat there in silence. Some unknown person with unknown intent was going through our things, and it was only a matter of time before that someone found the knife. And then what? Would he, we assumed it was a guy, start stabbing at the tent? We couldn't up and run. It would be spotted immediately. And anyway, it was a small island. Who would go there in the middle of the night? Or had that person already been there when we arrived and seen us approach? We barely dared to breathe as we waited for something to happen, until the tension was too much for Bella, always the impulsive one, who reached for her flashlight and was making a move to go outside when we grabbed hold of her and the shadow stopped in its tracks outside. We could hear something being dropped and hitting a rock, then slow steps moving in half a circle around the tent, ending up directly behind us, where we couldn't see it anymore. I've never been so frightened in my life. Suddenly, Bella shouted, "We have a gun and we have phoned the police," with the voice of someone who meant every word she said. There was a soft sound of somebody walking on moss, and soon there was nothing but silence. We waited for a while until we worked up the courage to run out of the tent, to the kayaks, and left. We didn't take anything with us, just left. We were back home at dawn and told my parents what had happened. First, they thought we were joking, but when they realized we had actually left all of our stuff, they realized it was real and phoned the police. The police took it more seriously than we had ever thought they would, and there was a reason for that. A few days earlier, a man, an ex-gym teacher, had assaulted his wife very badly and fled the scene before police arrived. They thought he was camping out to avoid being found and was thought to be dangerous and desperate. We made many more camping trips after this, but we took our dogs with us. Hello guys, I'm here to tell you about the hopefully finished chapter of my life. I am apologizing because I am on mobile and because of grammatical errors, and also English is not my first language. To preface, I have strikingly red hair, and in earlier encounters I was dressing a little bit alternative. Glossy combats, velvet pants, and my fur coat. I was always in black, and I always had strong makeup because I wanted to. Strange encounters were not uncommon to me. I've had plenty of homeless men approach me and offer me money for sexual activities, and because of that, I was more careful. Every single encounter that I was dragged into, someone of my close friends had to know in case something actually happened to me. My first encounter with this man happened when I was at the end of my sophomore year in high school. I went to the cinema with two of my friends and we were watching Love, Simon. A month before I had dyed my hair red, and it was honestly the best decision of my life. And for that occasion, I went with the gayest rainbow eye look you could think about. When the movie was over, we exited the mall, and while we were walking, a dude approached us. Tall and extremely thin, in shorts and some t-shirt, with a big rose tattooed on his fist. He asks us if we could lend him our phone for a quick phone call. My phone died in the cinema, so I tell him no as well as my other friend, but the girl says okay and dials the number. He talked on the phone about some money and some Gucci jacket he wanted to buy with that money. When he hangs up, he turns and asks for my Facebook. I was like, yeah, sure, I don't use it anyway. And I searched myself up and pressed add. When I came back to my dorm, I opened Facebook and decided to scope the situation out, and I freaked the heck out. He had these long rants about how nobody wants him, especially women, and how they're all dumb because he is so beautiful and no one is noticing it. I blocked him. That was in June. After that, nothing was happening. I forgot about him, and it was all okay. In my junior year of high school, I went to McDonald's after school because that morning my then boyfriend broke up with me and I wanted to treat myself so I couldn't cry anymore. Plus, I was wearing makeup because I did cry during the morning and I couldn't go to school like that. That summer, I cut my bangs and my hair grew, so I looked like a completely different person. I was minding my own business, watching some videos on my phone, when someone violently taps on my tray. I look up and I see him. My blood runs cold. He creepily smiles at me and tells me how beautiful I am and asks me if I'll be his girlfriend. I declined, and to his question, I answered that I'm taken anyway. He said okay and goes back to talking to someone on the phone. I continue to eat and just try to ignore how hard my heart is pounding. I alert one of my friends that's still in school next to the mall, and he says that his class is soon to be over. If the situation escalates, he'll come over. Not soon after, he taps again and tells me I played Eurojackpot, big lottery game in Europe, and I'm sure I'll win. I'll buy you anything you want, just be my girlfriend. I declined. He asked me if my ex-boyfriend is prettier than him, and I say yes. He just gets up and left. This was on February 8th. After that, I found out about him from my friend. His name and some of his past. He's a known drug addict in this town. His dad works as a lawyer in court, and no drug dealer wants to work with him because he's known to throw people under the bus. One cold evening, I was waiting for my boyfriend at a bus stop. I looked like a mismatched idiot with my fur coat on top of sweats, running shoes and beanie. Just rolled out of an afternoon nap. He approaches me and flat out asks me to be his girlfriend. While I was declining, my boyfriend came up and asked what was happening, while eyeing him. Dude pals up, says goodbye, and leaves. That was in March of 2019. When I started my senior year, I found out more about him. His parents didn't want him, so they just bought him a flat as a 12-year-old boy and let him to take care of himself. He fell into bad company, and that resulted in speed and later on heroin addiction. His addiction probably triggered some mental problems, and people speculate he probably had schizophrenia because he was often seen yelling at the air like somebody was there talking to him and having rapid body movements. One of my friends saw his dad beating him almost to death in the parking lot, and people had to jump in to separate them. One nice sunny day, my friend and I decided to doll up and go somewhere in the forest to smoke some weed, which is illegal in my country. We went to a fast food place, ordered, and sat out to eat. In the middle of my bite, I hear someone yelling, "Hey, hey." I look in front of me and I see him striding towards us. My friend is losing it and I start to feel panic creep on me. He steps to her side of the table and the conversation starts. "Hey," he greets, and I just blankly stare at him because I'm still in shock. "How are you?" "Good." At this point, I'm trying to get over this as quickly as I can because people are staring. "I was just going to some place and I wanted to ask if you wanted to come because, I was going somewhere and I wanted to ask you." "I'm busy right now, so no." "Are you taken?" "Yes." I wasn't. I just didn't want him to harass me even more. "Will you give me your phone number?" "No." In a question that made me lose my sanity and that sent me directly to an anxiety attack. "After everything that I've done for you?" "Yes." He says goodbye and leaves, yelling at someone in front of him. I started to cry because I felt so overwhelmed. My friend is trying to calm me down. This was in September. I'm sitting at a bus stop on a wall. I had my legs on the wall, bent at the knees with my bag underneath them, and my knees were holding up a little mirror, picking out my blackheads. It was wash day, so I had some gym clothes on. I am waiting for my friend from the incident before. I see somebody sitting at my feet. I look up and see him smiling at me. I just straight up tell him that I don't have time for his BS today, that I want him to leave. He yells at me that he was just sitting there and storms off. That was October. After that, I'd only see him around town in passing. I always hide my face when I see him going towards my direction so I can avoid him. I changed up my style a bit as well so I wouldn't have to be so noticeable in the crowd. My hair is still red. I don't want to dye it. I carry pepper spray around, and I always try to walk the walk and seem unapproachable so I don't have to go through unwanted conversations anymore. I moved a lot growing up. By the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 or so times, and it was about a year and a half into my most recent move. I had found a pretty close group of friends in middle school, and we all went to high school together. I met him through one of those close friends. They were in a band together, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavy-set, and originally kind of intimidating, although I was never afraid of large men before him. Lesson learned. I had kind of a bad home life, and I spent as much time as I could at school, sometimes hanging around the school campus until 6 or 7 at night with this friend group. 3 of us lived in the same direction, and we would walk the half-hour trip together until our paths split. One slightly colder evening, Sam offered to walk me home since the others had gone home already, and I just thought he was being a gentleman. He mentioned something from a previous move that he lived in California. He didn't walk a friend home and something horrible happened. He left it at that, and I let him walk me home. We got a lot closer after that. We bonded over both living in California and exchanged numbers. He would message me late into the night about his depression and stuff, and I just wanted to help. A few months later, he tried asking me out. It was this big romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song on the ukulele and sang to me in the cafeteria. But I was already dating someone, and when I turned him down, he got angry. A freaky, quiet, twitchy kind of angry. I felt so bad. I started seeing him everywhere. We were still friends. We still hang out in groups, but I would pass him on the street walking somewhere, and a few minutes later, I'd see that he'd changed directions and had started to follow me. He would walk me to my classes by following me in the passing period at a distance. I started to minimize the group time we spent together, and he would follow me more. I had friends meet me at each class and walk me to my next one because I felt unsafe. He knew where I lived. Then he started to talk. Not to me, but to mutual friends about that one girl in California who he tried to walk home. At first, she just shared my name, some crazy coincidence. Then she had the same brown curly hair and blue eyes. And every time he rambled about her, she became more and more like me. And then he said what happened. Over literal weeks, this fantasy evolved. They were walking home, and they were jumped by some guy with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong on her birthday, January 24th, my birthday, and she died horribly, and she couldn't react in time. She bled out in his arms. Sarah, who has brown curly hair, blue eyes, my name, my birthday, and sounds just like me, bled out in his arms. Each retelling added more and more detail, and this guy with his sick fantasy about my death would follow me around and know where I lived. My boyfriend was abusive, mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him as I could whenever I could, because if the worst happened, I knew for sure he could throw a punch. I never felt safe at our school or in our little town walking home from school in the dark. One day at school, he had a breakdown, freaked out, and ran out of the school in a panic. I was sent after him, and I found him curled up on the floor. I got closer. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety aside, I wanted to make sure he was alright. It was then that he told me this horrifying story that I had been hearing from mutual friends with added details. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We passed a dark alley, and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife and asking for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone. I didn't have anything else on me, and he thought I was calling the police. He stabbed me. Once, twice, again and again, and Sam stood there horrified. He saw red and grabbed a broken glass bottle near my body and attacked the homeless man. He killed him with his own knife. He told me he killed someone. My stalker killed someone. It didn't matter how messed up he was anymore. I didn't care if it was a fantasy or real, and I didn't care how it would affect his mental health anymore. I wanted to go to the police. I was scared for my life. My friends convinced me to go to the school counselor first. That morning, we went and told him everything. The stalking, the stories, and how he admitted to murder, and that was the reason they moved from California. How I was seriously afraid for my life and wanted to call the police. The counselor didn't take us seriously. She went to the principal, and the principal, not a mental health expert, called Sam in to talk about the accusations. The principal then informed me that he did not think Sam had any kind of mental illness or I was in any danger, and that was that. I lost faith in adults and gave up on going to the police. I stayed with my friend walking me in between classes, hiding behind my abusive boyfriend, and looking behind me every step of my walk home that year. The counselors ended up gaslighting us to the point where this all feels like a fever dream now, and I would think it's made up if it weren't for my journal entries recording the events and my growing panic and the similar stories from my friend group. I always wanted to share this, but can never find the right subreddit to do so, so now that I have, let's do it. For reference, I'm a 21-year-old male, and this took place about 3 years ago when I was 18. I had recently graduated high school and wanted to wait about a year before starting college, and so I took the year to just kick back, relax, and prepare myself for the next step in life. I quickly got bored of doing nothing and decided to find a job for some spending money. I applied at a local supermarket. a gas station, and a dollar store. After not receiving any callbacks from the dollar store, and doing a pretty dismal job in my interview at the supermarket, resulting in no callbacks, most likely, the gas station was my only hope. But luckily I got the job. I started off working second shift for a few days, but volunteered to take the overnight shift after somebody had quit and after the manager felt that I was ready to be on my own. The first 2 weeks go by well, and I'm learning the ropes, and at that point where I can do everything with no supervision now, and I'm finally left alone. I learn all of my regular customers by name and whatnot, and things are going well. My first paycheck wasn't the greatest, but at least I was able to buy some things that I wanted. One night I was mindlessly working, easiest job ever by the way, and not really paying attention to what was going on around me when the door chimed, signaling someone's entering. I quickly had to run back over to the register, and by the time I got there, whoever had come in was already somewhere in the store, so I waited for them to approach the register. Up comes a tall Caucasian woman, probably 6'2", using my 6'2" dad as reference here, and quite thin. She was strikingly beautiful though, dressed in all black leather and had long curly black hair that went down past her shoulders. She looked like half biker chick or half cowgirl, given on top of her head was a black cowgirl hat. I was taken aback almost immediately. We exchanged greetings and she introduced herself as Haley. I rang her stuff up and then she asked for a can of Kodiak, chewing tobacco. So I grabbed one for her and she gave me a toothy smile, and I was surprised to see her teeth were pearly white. There's no way a chewer would have such perfect looking teeth, but perhaps it was for someone else, I thought. I was then caught off guard when she complimented how striking my eyes and nose were, which something no one had ever complimented me on before. Feeling quite starstruck, I looked down for a moment and then complimented how good her attire looked, saying she really pulls off the biker or cowgirl look. Then she gave me the most goofy looking smile, which was a little strange. She then giggled to herself and left shortly afterwards. The next few nights she came in and bought the same things, and each time we exchanged compliments. I could tell something was a little bit off about her though. Her eyes were always looking like she was zoning out into space. I put it down to probably being high, which I can't really judge because I'm not exactly the type of person to shy away from the occasional joints or hits at the bong when I'm with friends. Things became strange about a month afterward. She came in regularly for a while and then came in maybe once a week at most. Nearing the end of the month in question, she came in one evening and gave me some really weird looks and left without buying anything, and she suddenly stopped showing up. I must admit, I wasn't really all creeped out or afraid of this woman because I was attracted to her. Male libido can be quite a powerful thing, but I had begun to think she wasn't really all there, if you know what I mean. She didn't come by the store for a while until one evening when she came in and bought the same stuff she usually did. When I rang up her things, she asked me if I was single, to which I said I was, and I was never really the dating type of person. She left without saying another word. Fast forward a week, Haley comes back into the store one evening, and as I'm ringing up her things, she tells me she has her wedding dress picked out. I was caught off guard by this and asked her who she was marrying as I placed her things in a bag. She giggled and said that we were getting married next week. My heart dropped, and I stepped back a few feet after she grabbed the bag and left. I did a double take and slapped myself in the face before realizing that this was actually real and not a dream. This woman was serious. I was dumbfounded and had no idea how to respond to this. I stepped outside and watched Haley get into her red sedan and drove off into the night as I paced back and forth, wondering just what on earth was going on with this woman. I had a feeling to look at my car, which I always kept parked along the side of the store. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary when I checked it. I don't know why I had that feeling, but something was telling me to look at it. A few more days go by and Haley doesn't show up. I told my manager about this woman who was coming in and acting all strange and whatnot, but my manager's only advice was to have the phone with me and to be prepared to call the authorities if something were to happen. That sure did put me at ease. Not. The following week, the week we were supposedly getting married, I went outside to take the trash and noticed that my driver's side car window was smashed as I was walking over to the dumpster. Great. Somebody probably stole my car radio and whatever else I had in there. I looked inside and surprisingly noticed that nothing was stolen. Glass was all over the floor and the driver's seat, and I sighed before heading on back inside. I had my manager look at the camera footage that morning to see who had smashed my window, and sure enough, a tall-looking person with long hair had come by and smashed my window before running off camera. Well, at least I know that it was most likely Haley. My manager called the police, who came in and checked out the footage while I gave them her name and description and explained to them the strange encounters I had with her. I was surprised to learn that her name was in fact Haley and that she was arrested very early that morning after she smashed the window for public drunkenness and drug possession after she was spotted walking down the center of the highway about 2 miles away from the store. I decided to show a bit of mercy and not press charges since she was already in a bad situation with the drug possession and public drunkenness charges she was facing. I was just glad she wouldn't bother me again. I had my window replaced that afternoon and never saw her again. Not too long ago, I worked in the IT field and had to go to many job sites where I performed tasks. Being a friendly, outgoing person, I found the need to talk to people and become an acquaintance of theirs. My friendliness soon turned into mixed signals, however. I had normally met most people at this one office I went to, but I often heard of an older woman in her 50s. Her name was Becky, and she was rarely around. The day I met her, I had just got out of a 2-year relationship, and I was kind of in a down mood. I was keeping to myself mostly, and didn't really let it show because that was unprofessional. Becky came up to me and introduced herself since I was working on installing a new PC for her, and I introduced myself and kept working to get my mind off of things. Becky looked a little scary with big eyes and heavy mascara and messed up makeup. Her hair was messy and all over the place. She asked my age and I told her I was 19. And she said I was young and handsome. I was flattered and thanked her for saying that but carried on with the install. She started whispering things and I kind of stopped and listened because I thought she was talking to me. And when I turned around, her dead green eyes stared at me like a teenage girl stared at Justin Bieber. I felt uneasy with her standing over me, with a huge grin on her face. She tried to start a conversation by commenting on my hair. "You have some nice curly hair. I bet you make some pretty babies," she said in a weird low voice. I know you probably think it's not that bad, but then she asked for my personal cell phone number. I tried to change the subject, but she insisted on it and never told me why. Normally, if somebody asked for it, they said they wanted me to do some off-site work with a home PC or something. That wasn't the case with Becky though. Until I left, she practically followed me around, asking questions about me and just adding on to the creep factor. I answered almost everything in hopes that she'd run out of things. That was never the case. I quit the job this last December and still think about how creeped out I was by her. It's normal for older women to have crushes, but her approach at what she may have interpreted as flirting was scary. Guys can be creeped out too. I can now say that from experience. This was in June in Asheville, North Carolina. My boyfriend and my dog and I were camping along the Appalachian Trail, along the river where we were kayaking. We had got done kayaking for the day, and we were relaxing at our campsite before dinner. Our site was only like 10 feet from the trail, and the river was right behind that. We had some dramatic and stressful events while kayaking that day, and we needed to unwind and relax. We were running low on weed, so we had just eaten some edibles because we are stoners and why not? My boyfriend was half asleep in his hammock. I was at the river's edge, and I was laying on a towel near the tent, when a man came walking up to us, blabbing about giving us his trash. I was at first confused, but he was wearing a backpack and an Appalachian Trail shirt, so I quickly realized he was a serious hiker on the trail, and wanted us to take his trash for him, which is a pretty reasonable request. However, we were only a 5-minute walk down the trail, and there was basic civilization, including a dumpster and whatnot, literally 5 minutes down the trail. I told him this because I'm sure he would rather just put it in the bin himself in that case. But he then pulled out a large bag of weed and said I could have some if I took his trash. I was a little confused, but I would never turn down free weed, so I was like, sure, whatever, we will throw it out. He gave me a small handful of nugs and threw his trash into our bag, and I asked him some small stuff like, "Oh, are you through hiking?" and whatever basic stuff. He said he was and had been for a couple of months, and asked if he could stay and drink a beer. And I was like, sure, this guy seems like he really just needs to talk to some people or something. And I wasn't doing anything, and he seems normal enough, so why not? I did think he might have only been there because I looked like a girl who was alone, if he hadn't noticed the hammock. But I thought at most he would be mildly disappointed he couldn't hit on me or whatever.
My boyfriend popped his head up at some point, and the hiker did seem surprised to see him, which confirmed that he thought I was alone. He kept saying stuff like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not one of those creepy people." Like, okay dude, I hope not. I was trying to be friendly and just ask some basic questions, more about trail stories, and the guy was answering normal enough. My boyfriend and I decided to smoke some weed by the river, and of course offered the guy some, because he had given us the weed in the first place. He hits it and coughs a bunch, and that's when stuff gets weird. As a stoner, we were used to seeing people get too high and act a little weird, but this guy was being incredibly strange. He talked and talked and talked, but it was so quiet we couldn't really hear a thing he said. I tried to seem interested and respond to stuff, but I had no clue what he was saying. He was just staring at the river, talking to himself, and then occasionally looking at us like we were part of the conversation. And me be like, "Oh, right, ha ha ha." It was so strange and confusing. He also drank like 3 beers at least, and 2 cigarettes during the time, so it was not a short amount of time. This man would not leave. He started talking to Siri on his phone when we stopped answering him, and he was like yelling at Siri, calling her a bitch. At one point out of nowhere, he goes, "On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I seem like a serial killer?" My boyfriend and I looked at each other like we had both just had the same thought, that this guy had just gotten way too creepy. We both nervously laughed and said, "Oh, 1, meaning not at all for sure." I tried to act casual like it was definitely a joke or something, but we were both thinking, what the fuck. After that, I said, "Nope, this guy's not welcome here," and I got in the hammock, and so did my boyfriend. And we kind of sat there talking to each other a bit, and not really acknowledging the guy. He had said he was going to smoke 1 more cig and then leave. And I swear, that was the longest cigarette I've ever witnessed in my life. It took him so long to finish it, and I was just watching it get shorter and shorter, hoping he would just leave already. He finally got up and put his stuff on and left. But it was almost dark, so we knew he would not go too far before setting up camp for the night too. That night, we thought for sure this guy would come back and kill us. Throughout the night, people did walk by on the trail multiple times, but it was other people we had seen on the trail during the day. One being a couple that seemed to be on drugs and maybe lived up the trail. We literally planned what we would do if he came back, which was grab the dog and jump in the river and float to the boat ramp downstream. Anyway, he didn't end up showing up that night and we didn't see him again, but it was enough to freak us out. It's possible this guy was just lacking some social skills and also had been in the woods by himself for a while, but it's also possible that he really had some creepy shit going on, and I'm definitely glad I wasn't alone when he walked up. I grew up in southern Appalachia, in western North Carolina, 30 minutes outside of the town of Asheville. The hills and hollers of the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world, some of the rock formations dating back over 1 billion years. That quite literally means they were here before there were terrestrial animals. As with most things that have been on Earth for a long time, there are inexplicable anomalies, both benevolent and malevolent. For example, the Brown Mountain Lights. Never in my life have I felt threatened or uneasy when witnessing them from wise man's view. They're neither good nor evil, they just are. On the benevolent side, sometimes you walk through an abandoned old church, up near mom and dad's property line. You can feel good, warm, and happy energy. It's like that first warm day of summer, when the sunshine is not too hot but it's not too cold. Well, this story is not about one such anomaly. It's about something that was definitely malevolent. About a decade ago, I was in night school up at AB Tech, going to school for some automotive mechanics. I would go into class at about 2 p.m. after I got off my part-time job, and I would end up getting home at about 10:30 p.m., depending on the traffic. Every night I drove the same road in my old 1973 W200 Dodge pickup. Some nights it would get rather boring, and I would take a different route, jump off of I-40 and drive the back roads. On this particular evening, I had decided to just stay on I-40 because I just wanted to go home and go to bed. It was Thursday, and there was no class on Friday, and I wanted to get in bed early so I could go into the woods and go hiking early the next day, and watch the sun come up. As I jumped off of I-40 onto the exit where my parents lived, the night seemed to get darker, and none of the animals that I could hear through my rolled-down windows made any more noise. I have never faced any kind of anxiety in my life, but at that moment something felt off, and there was no way I could put my finger on what it was. I came to a stop on the exit ramp, turned to go down the road, and I happened to notice that the gas station off the exit, where Mom and Dad lived, had no lights on. They were a 24-hour truck stop and always had lights on, but I didn't think about it again after noticing. I just chalked it up to the power being out, but I could not shake the feeling that something was definitely askew. I slowly shifted through all of my old truck's gears, not wanting to make any more noise than an old pickup already did. I leaned over my steering wheel to look up at the moon through the windshield, and there were barely any stars visible, which was way out of the ordinary. If you've ever been to Appalachia, primarily the sparsely populated areas where I'm from, you can see the Milky Way on clear nights. An absence of stars back home is only due to cloud cover or whatever in the hell went on this particular night. As I rounded a particularly sharp left-hand curve and chugged through a straight stretch, before the next right-hander, I looked at the ancient decaying barn I always gazed at when riding that stretch of road, and thought about how long that thing had been here, and how many advancements and civilization it had seen. For the split second that my gaze wandered, a very large, sickly-looking dog ran out in front of my truck, no more than 10 feet in front of me. Old Betsy was a good truck, but she didn't stop well. I heard the fence post I had left in my truck bounce out of my bed and then back into it as I slid to a stop. My first thought was, oh no, now I have to go tell these neighbors that I ran over their dog. That shit doesn't go real far with people around here. It can really set them off depending on the dog and the person. As I sat there breathing in the smell of burning rubber, something else found its way into my nose. The stench of rotting flesh. It's not a smell you forget once you smell it one time. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I just chalked it up to some rotting roadkill nearby. Finally, I thought to myself, let me go check and see who this dog belongs to. I pushed my clutch in, shifted to reverse, and as I looked in my rear view mirror, illuminated by the haunting glow of my reverse lamps, was the same dog. Only it wasn't on 4 legs anymore. It had stood up like a man well over 10 foot tall. Only then did it dawn on me that the front of my truck was every bit of 5 feet tall, and this dog was every bit of 5 foot tall at the shoulder on all 4s. As it turned its head to look in the direction of my truck, I caught only a glimpse of this creature. It was not a dog, it was not a man, it was somewhere in between, and at the same time entirely separate altogether. Its skin hung loose, off of its emaciated and thin frame, like a raccoon. Bits of matted fur and dirt and mud clung to its legs like a disease. The right arm seemed a little longer than the left, and they both hung abnormally low, in relation to either animal this creature seemed to be. As it regained its senses, it turned and looked into the mirror like it knew exactly where I was sitting. The face was that of a man's, but the very edges of its face seemed to not be totally defined. They seemed to move and change like something you would see at a cellular level in a scientific documentary. There were no eyes, but only sockets where eyes should have been. No hair, and the skin that was dripping off of its face was a cold, lifeless gray color. The nose was short and shoved into its face like a bulldog. Teeth still haunt me. It was definitely carnivorous. And true to the form of the rest of its unnatural look, many of the teeth didn't seem to be arranged in a natural way in its mouth. They seemed to fill and spill forth from the indefinable face, almost like they knew the horror they occupied and they were searching for a way out. It stared through my life, into my eyes and past my soul. It seemed like an eternity, but it could have not been more than 5 seconds that I sat there paralyzed. A light came on at the house next to the road, causing the creature to snap its glaive in that direction and tear off into the woods on its back 2 legs, like a man. I jammed my old truck in first gear and roasted tires all the way through first, snatched second gear and drove as fast as I could home. When I got to the house, both of my parents were asleep. I went downstairs into my bedroom and loaded every firearm I possessed and locked all of the doors. I couldn't wake them up. I mean, who the hell would believe that, and at 10:30 on a Thursday night? The basement was eerily quiet that night. Even their dogs that got up to raise hell at outside animals at all hours of the night were dead silent. The old post and beam house didn't even creak or pop that night, as was usual. At about 3 a.m., I started to finally get drowsy, and as I went to lay my head down to get some sleep, so I could still attempt to go hiking the next morning, I smelled the stench of death again. It was faint at first, but it was definitely there. I thought to myself, you're just going crazy. None of that shit was real. But as I dwelt on it, it became more and more noticeable until it filled the entire basement. My dad has a home office in the basement with 2 large glass doors that face national forests, 500,000-acre woods. I finally worked up the courage to walk out of my bedroom and into the basement living room. With my little tactical 12-gauge loaded, tack light on. I covered the flashlight with my hand so as not to make my presence known until need be. And as I turned right out of the living room into my father's office, I shined the light through the glass doors and at the edge of the woods. There stood the creature. It was motionless. It stared right into the light, unafraid, with those soulless sockets devoid of eyes. I quickly covered my tactical light, ran into the living room and flipped on the outdoor floodlights, and to my surprise, it was no longer standing at the edge of the woods, but between the house and the edge of the woods. Still motionless, though. I swung the door open and fired every round I had into its direction. I must have scored a couple of hits because it screeched an unearthly scream, like that of a woman being slaughtered, as it took off into the woods. The dogs went crazy. Mom and Dad woke up asking what the hell I was doing. I told them that a bear had gone to the trash and I was scaring it away. They didn't believe me, but I knew they wouldn't believe the truth either. I didn't sleep that night, or any time until the following Sunday. Everything seemed to return to normal, and I didn't think about the creature again until I met my wife about 6 years later. Her mother's house sits at the mouth of the holler, no more than 4 or 5 miles up the road from my mother and father's. Up on the side of the holler, there are kennels for her brother's hunting dogs. No longer in use and haven't been in years, but the fence is still there and the concrete pad is still there. It's a thing of great use when you need to quarantine an animal. Her Great Pyrenees had gotten into a tussle with a raccoon, which of course he destroyed, but his rabies vaccination had lapsed, so we had to keep him quarantined for a time. It didn't bother him, as he kind of liked solitude. This particular night, that we were coming home from a movie date in a neighboring town, was the last night of quarantine for him. So we walked up the trail using our phone flashlights to get to the kennel, and there he sat, patiently waiting, tail wagging happy to see us. We put him on a leash and started walking back to the house with him. As we were walking back through the darkness, I started to feel the same feeling I had felt the night I hit the creature in my truck. I didn't say anything, so as not to alarm my wife, but then the smell came wafting in on the breeze. She jokingly asked me, "My God, what did you eat? You stink." I half-assed laughed, not being able to fully appreciate the joke for the horrors that raged within my mind. She immediately caught on and asked me what was wrong, to which I could only reply, "I'll tell you later." She grew up in the woods and around hunting and things of that nature her whole life, so she knew what I meant. She knew we were being watched by something. When we could see the lights of the house from the trail to the kennel, we heard it. There came barking from the kennel that sounded just like the Great Pyrenees we had on a leash next to us. It was a perfect imitation. The Pyrenees, being a guardian dog, immediately sensed that something was wrong, and so he turned to face the danger, belting out deep barks and growls in that direction. I don't know if you've ever had to drag a 150-pound dog, but it sucks. And it's not an easy task. I'm 6 foot tall and 240 pounds, and it was all I could do to get him back to the house. The barking never ceased the entire time we were running toward the house. In fact, it seemed to grow closer and closer, till it seemed it was coming from inside my own head. Her mother heard the commotion and flipped the floodlights on as we made it into the fence of the yard, and I caught a glimpse of something coming to a dead stop at the end. At the end of where the light reached, wheeling around and tearing off back into the darkness. My wife looks at me and goes, "You want to tell me what the fuck that was?" To which I replied, "Yes, let's just go inside." I told her the story, and she listened intently, hanging on to every word. Her family came from a long line of granny witches and other supernatural healers of the Appalachians, so her older sister came over the next morning with some herbs and chants to bless the property and to ward off evil. I suggested we go up to the dog kennels and do them as well. When we got to the kennels, they were completely destroyed. The very concrete foundation was cracked, and the chain link fence was torn off of its posts. The dog houses were destroyed, and the place reeked of the stench that followed the creature. My wife's older sister just went about her business like normal, blessed the place, and burnt some herbs and led us back into the property. When we got into the house, she wheeled about on us suddenly and instructed us very firmly to never go into the woods after dark. Not until this thing left me alone. To make a long story short, my wife joined the military and she ended up getting stationed in Delaware. Well, as someone who's lived around fairly large mountains and endless wilderness their entire life, Delaware is pretty terrible. At least that was my thought when we first moved to the middle of a 50,000 plus population city. Fortunately, though, it didn't take us long to find a house in a sleepy little community further south. We purchased the house and moved in with haste. We were both very grateful and glad to be out of the city and into a rural setting again. The land in Delaware seems lifeless in comparison to Appalachia. The sparsely populated woods don't possess any energy that goes one way or the other. The ground doesn't seem to be alive like it is in Appalachia. Having not thought about the creature in a long time, I resumed my staying outside after dark and playing with our dogs in our rather large yard that borders a small patch of woods. Well, last night, I went outside to play with the dogs, and as dark set in, I built a decent-sized fire in my fire pit and consumed some good old-fashioned Appalachian mountain cough syrup from a mason jar. And just as the fire was dying down, my American bulldog tore off towards the woods. He has a habit of running off to go on adventures, so my immediate instinct was to chase him down in the yard and tackle him so he could not get away. As I tackled his 110-pound ass to the ground and threw him in a fireman's carry over my shoulders, I heard him begin to bark. Only the bark was not coming from him. The only sound coming from him was a deep rumbling growl, a noise I've never really heard him make. It was a threatening noise. Something was definitely wrong, and as I ran with him on my shoulders back to the house, the stench of death again began to fill the air. The two other dogs must have caught wind of what was happening and met me at the back door, which I threw open, slammed shut, locked, and again loaded my firearms. How the hell could this thing have followed us 650 miles up here? As I flipped my floodlights on, the backside of my house, several of the bushes and small trees at the forest's edge were still shaking like something had just run through them. My dogs went crazy all night, barking and howling and attempting to get out of the windows. I didn't sleep a bit, and I don't think I will for a while. I know for sure I won't be in the woods after dark ever again in my life. Not until this thing is gone. Originally, I'm from West Virginia. I moved around between the Appalachian and the Midwest some as a kid. Between the ages of 10 to 13, I lived in rural Kentucky in the foothills of one of the oldest mountain ranges on the planet. I lived with my dad and my grams. We lived in kind of like a cul-de-sac in between a set of foothills. We lived in the middle of the neighborhood with nothing but my family on both sides. No one lived across from us or behind us because of the foothills. When I moved in, my grandma had some rules I had to follow. At the time, I chalked them up to hillbilly stranger danger. They were saying like don't mess around with the wild animals, don't go out into the woods alone, and then they got a little weird. If you hear your name, don't answer it and don't go to it. And if you see someone in the woods you might know, no you didn't, just come home. This experience happened in August when I was 11. My dad and I had mowed a path through the tall grass and berry bushes to the left of the double wide we lived in. We camped out there a lot because it was close enough that we could check on my grandma. Now when you're in the woods, things are louder than you think. You have animal life, bugs chattering, wind through the trees and grass. There was a stream that ran along the road you could easily hear. That night we added the campfire to that list. My dad decided to go back up to the house about a quarter mile to get more beer and to check on Grandma. Before he left, he told me to not mess with the fire. After a few minutes of watching the fire, things started to get quiet, like real quiet. The wind had all but stopped. Bug and animal sounds were all gone, and the stream sounded like it was miles away. I was getting uncomfortable, even though I've been left at the campground before like this. Then I started to smell and taste it. It was in the back of my throat out of nowhere. This awful metal tang. After a few more moments of dread, my dad came back. He was mad right away. Said he could smell burning metal coming up the trail. He accused me of tossing beer cans in the fire. I told him I didn't, and even pointed to the fire to prove it. He said there was a storm coming in and we needed to get back home, and he let it go. We left the tent and started our way back. Now the very cool but very weird thing about lightning in the woods this dense is when the lightning lights up everything like the middle of the day, well up into the front of the trees. After the first set of trees, it's pitch black. There are no street lights, and unless you have lights on your property, it's completely black. So it's pitch black, lightly raining, and other than dim lights from the house windows, there's nothing. I'm eating watermelon as one does in August in the mountains when the first clap of lightning hits. Everything is as bright as it can be. After the second passes, it's pitch black. Next clap of lightning comes, and that's when I kind of see it. On the porch, past the yard, over the stream, past the road, and the ditches on either side, just past the first line of trees. I could see the silhouette of it. Then it goes dark. This is also when I can start to taste the same awful burning metal. I'm not really sure what I saw, so I kind of just stay still. It's a few moments before the lightning hits again. The figure is now closer, standing side by side to the trees. I'm standing now, not sure what to do. Not wanting to see it again or get any closer, I run inside. My grandma is doing dishes and ask why I'm inside. I tell her I think I saw something. She almost immediately gets my dad on his feet, telling him to shut and lock all the windows and doors. My dad, vaguely drunk, obeys. That night I sleep with her, and the next day we discover the tent doors torn off. It didn't look like an animal. Things weren't cut or shredded, but it looked like someone took and pulled it apart. My uncle, who lived a mile or so up, had all 8 chickens killed, heads gone, but no blood. The next few weeks, all the kids had to wait for the bus with an adult. My dad had to be late for work for almost 3 weeks. Anytime I tried to talk about it, I just had the subject changed. I just figured I was a kid and it wasn't important or real, but it wasn't until years later I finally understood. I was in my early 20s and some cousins were in town for Halloween. As I was telling this story, my aunt got irate with me, saying, "Don't you tell them that. Don't you put that evil on them." After I couldn't help but think back on all the times I tried to talk about it and how I was shunned. My kid mind not realizing it wasn't as simple as a subject change, but then actively shushing me. Once I started dipping my toes in Reddit, I realized there was a name for this thing. The same name my auntie had called it that day at the party, and other people have seen it. The Goat Men. What bothers me the most is how to this day I couldn't describe any feature, nor have I ever tasted that awful burning metal taste. So friends, if you ever find yourself in the foothills of Kentucky, please remember my grandma's rules. I once had a close friend who was an avid hiker. We will call her Annie for the sake of keeping her identity safe. She spent most of her free time hiking trails in and around the Appalachian region of Tennessee and North Carolina. No matter what the time of year was, she would always be out hiking. One summer, she decided to spend a few weeks hiking the Appalachian Trail. She wasn't going to do the full thing. She just intended to start at the beginning in Springer Mountain, Georgia, and finish up at the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. I was all for it and encouraged her to do it. I even helped her prepare, and we even arranged for me to meet her where the trail crossed through the Newfound Gap area in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I was going to bring her new supplies and hike for a few days with her along the trail while she was in the park, close by to where I lived at the time. The time came for her to begin her journey, and I drove her to the trailhead, dropping her off and left behind a very excited and determined Annie. During the first few weeks of her journey, I received several postcards from her as she would stop in and pick up her pre-arranged packages containing re-ups of food and supplies. She would write as often as she could to assure me that she was safe and making good time. Eventually, July rolled around and it was getting close to when I was going to meet her. Before she left, we had sat down and figured out about when she would be reaching the backcountry shelter we were set to meet at. July 10th was the day we settled on. She was supposed to send me a postcard from the last re-up spot before when we were set to meet. And true to all of her previous cards, I received one detailing that she felt great, that she was on schedule to meet me at the Mount LeConte shelter on July 7th. I had received the card on July 2nd. We were going to stay at the lodge for the evening and have dinner and rest up before continuing the trail. Mount LeConte Lodge was one of the more popular destinations in the park, and you had to make the reservation months in advance in order to have a shelter for one night. It was important that we stayed true to our schedule, and Annie knew this very well. I gathered up all of the supplies we would need and had my then boyfriend drive me to the trailhead. He was going to hike with me to the shelter and leave once I had met up with Annie. We had a great time hiking there, enjoying the breathtaking views of the Smokies, while panting and sweating our way up the steep climbs. Eventually, we made it to the shelter, and I fully expected Annie to be there waiting for us. It was mid-afternoon, and we had been running an hour or two behind schedule. We went to the front desk to see if she had made it and checked in, only to find out that she had not arrived yet. We didn't think much of it because you can't be completely sure when someone is going to arrive with this kind of stuff, so we took our gear and settled in our bunker. We went up to the lodge and had some coffee and leisurely enjoyed our books and the views while waiting for Annie to arrive. Sunset came and she still hadn't shown up. This is when I began to get worried. My boyfriend and I walked over to the office and asked if anyone named Annie had tried to check in, and to our dismay, no one had. We went back to our shelter and my boyfriend tried to calm me down as my anxiety began to take over. She's probably running behind schedule. The trails in this area of the park reach the highest elevations of the entire Appalachian. She probably got worn out and fell behind track, he assured me. If she doesn't get here tonight, she'll probably make it by tomorrow. Don't worry. I tried to let his words soothe my worries as we lay down for rest, but I endured a long sleepless night. She didn't show up the next day. We waited at the office for hours, but she never came. Around 2 in the afternoon, we decided to hike down the trail towards the direction she was due to be coming from. We told the lady at the office to tell Annie we would be back if she arrived while we were gone. We made it back to the lodge around 5 p.m. and found out she had not been there. From this point, things got hectic. I won't go into much detail with it, but we had no choice but to leave the lodge and return home, leaving contact information with the people at the lodge to let us know if she ever arrived. Days passed and no sign of her arose. Anxiety and guilt and fear ate me alive in the days following. We had notified the police and mass search parties were sent out. Rangers, the police, and volunteers scoured the area between where she was last seen and where she was supposed to arrive. It wasn't until almost a week and a half later that they found her, bruised and starving, hiding in a ravine about 30 miles away from the Appalachian Trail and the shelter she last stayed at. Just over a day later, I was finally allowed to see her at the hospital. She didn't tell the police anything about what happened. She hadn't even spoken at all. Matter of fact, it took her a few years to tell me what had fully happened to her, including the details that she wouldn't tell the police. The experience had made her quit hiking altogether. I'm not sure if she would like me sharing this with you guys, but I want people to be aware that this exists and is something you should look out for when hiking. The Smokies most likely aren't the only place where this can happen. I will tell you exactly as I remember, in her words, the best I can. I left the shelter at around 8 in the morning on June 31st, and I hiked most of the day, making really good time. I was resting and eating some snacks to give me the last boost of energy I needed to make it to my campsite for the night. It was late in the afternoon, and that's when I first heard it. The sounds of men's voices came from a pretty good distance away, but I figured it was just some guys walking the trail, nothing out of the ordinary. I sat there for another 15 minutes, but nobody ever walked by. The voices would come in and out. It was weird. But at this point, I had been hiking alone for a few weeks, so I assumed I was just making up things in my head, because I was lacking regular human contact. I grabbed my things and continued on my way, reaching my campsite just as the sun disappeared and light was waning. I set up my tent and strung my belongings up on the wire cables to keep them from bears and animals if they decided to wander over. I was relaxing in my sleeping bag, reading a book when I heard it again. Voices, louder now than before. I could faintly make out heavy Appalachian accents. Though it was still difficult to make out their conversation, I waited for the sound of leaves crunching or twigs cracking to indicate hikers joining my sight, but the sound never came. I shut my eyes and willed myself to sleep. You're just hearing things, I told myself. The next morning greeted me with the soft sounds of birds chirping and a soft breeze humming through the trees and against my tent. I went outside and, to my dismay, found some wrappers of my freeze-dried blood scattered across the ground. They looked as if they had been torn into, and all the food was gone. It was only a couple of packs, so I still had a decent supply. I guess the squirrels had found a way into my backpack. The only strange part about it was that my backpack was zipped shut and didn't show any signs of any nibbling or scratches an animal would have left. I packed up my campsite uneasily, trying not to think about the coincidence of the voices I heard the night before. I walked faster this day, trying to keep a quicker pace with the hopes that I would leave the weird voices and strange happenings behind me. I had been hiking for a few hours, passing a very minimal amount of people. When I heard the voices again, they didn't go away this time. They always seemed to stay at a steady pace behind me, and no matter how many times I looked over my shoulder, I could never find anyone. I came upon my next campsite and made the split decision to hike through the night. If these people who had been following me were dangerous, I didn't want to set up camp and leave myself in a vulnerable position to be attacked. I walked slowly through the night, using my flashlight as a guide. The voices had stopped a couple of hours ago, and I was beginning to feel like I had lost them, whoever they were. I came to a small opening in the trail and decided I would rest for a few hours, because my feet felt like they were on fire from all the walking I had done. I hadn't even taken the tent from my backpack when I heard the voices, this time directly behind me. There she is. A deep voice rung through my ears, and I spun around, pointing my flashlight in the eyes of two men who were ragged, dirty, and unshaven. The look in their eyes was sinister, and I will never forget the way my skin crawled beneath their gaze. I screamed and took off running in the direction I had come from. I could hear their bare feet running along the trail behind me as I ran. When I was far enough away and over a hill, I cut off the trail and sprinted as fast as I could through the brush and trees. It was breaking dawn at this point, so I was able to maneuver easier than if it were still pitch black out. For the next 2 weeks, I hid in the woods, dodging their looming voices and hiding in bushes. They were never far off. Sometimes I would see them wandering around and talking about the things they wanted to do to me. They looked as if they hadn't bathed in months, and they both only wore torn-up cargo shorts. Their hair was long and their bodies were covered in mud. I knew I wouldn't have anyone looking for me for at least another week, because no one was expecting me until July 7th. I barely fended for myself, struggling to find water and to ration my food accordingly. I knew if they found me, they would do bad things to me. I felt it in their eyes. I felt it when I looked at their clenched fists and heard their raspy voices. Eventually, a park ranger and a group of volunteers found me. A few weeks after being home and out of the hospital, I did some research and found out there were people who would hide in the mountains to escape the law, living there in order to avoid jail for the crimes they had committed. There were people who had murdered and violated people in many ways, in ways that would have warranted life in jail or even death. They are called the Wild Men. After hearing her story, I haven't gone hiking much. They can't possibly be the only ones out there. If you go hiking deep in the mountains, be sure to watch your back, because the wild men are always lurking. To start this off, I need to give some context. I'm 23 and I currently live in New York City, but I have grandparents who live middle of nowhere in West Virginia. When I say that, I mean the literal boonies. Their closest neighbors are over an hour away in a small town with a few houses and a Walmart. Last summer, my grandfather, who I'll just call Robert for privacy reasons, had surgery done to his hip. The majority of my family lives on the West Coast, and my grandmother, who I'll just refer to as Muriel, is very old and wouldn't have been able to take care of Robert. Because I was the closest family member, I was the one they asked to come down there and help out with my grandfather. Being the good grandson I am, I agreed to come down there for 2 weeks while he recovered from his surgery. But fast forward a week, everything was going fine. All I really had to do was help my grandfather up and down the stairs and walk his dog, a blue heeler named Rocky. Normally, my grandfather would walk Rocky once in the morning and once at night through the woods, behind their property. But because of his surgery, that responsibility fell onto me. This was the part that I hated about helping him, because ever since a kid, I never liked those woods behind the property. Whenever I'd go down there as a kid, me and my cousins would always get creeped out going into that forest. It always just felt off for some reason. Anyways, for the first week, walking Rocky in the forest at night was fine, even if a bit creepy. That was until one night, a week into my stay, I was walking him through the forest. It was around 8:30, and the sun was setting over the Appalachian Mountains. Everything was going normal until I heard a strange whistle that sounded like it was only around 20 yards away. Both me and the dog stopped dead in our tracks and looked towards the direction the whistling came from. I shined my flashlight in the direction, but I didn't see anything, so I just assumed it was a bird. Looking back, it definitely wasn't a bird. There's no nocturnal birds that chirp and whistle out there, and it sounded more musical than anything a bird could whistle. But the dog was spooked. He wouldn't stop growling and staring at whatever was back there, and he kept trying to back up until whatever or whoever this thing was whistled again, to which the dog started barking and going crazy. At this point, I decided that I definitely didn't want to stay there, so I yanked on the dog's leash, and we both bolted out of the woods and went straight back home. When we got back, and I told my grandparents what happened, they both seemed spooked, and my grandmother immediately asked if I whistled back. I told her that I didn't, and she seemed relieved, but told me that I didn't hear anything and to just ignore it. I asked why, and she wouldn't tell me, and would instead tell me I didn't hear anything. I decided not to press it any further, and I went to bed, terrified and wondering what she seemed so freaked out about. The next morning, she told me that instead of walking Rocky through the woods, I could just take him on a few laps around the house, so that's what I started doing. Every night I would take Rocky for around 50 laps around the house before going back inside. On Friday, the third to the last day I would be there, at night, I was walking the dog again for laps, as usual, until I heard that same creepy whistle behind the attached garage, which was only around 10 yards from the house. This time, I immediately took the dog back inside and locked the doors. The rest of the night, I put in my earbuds and I ignored any more whistling like my grandmother told me to. To this day, I still don't know what was whistling in those woods. Some of my friends said it was a skinwalker, but that's not really a thing around here. My girlfriend, who stayed back in New York City, asked her Muslim parents, who are from Yemen, and they said whistling at night is a sign that a jinn is nearby. I don't know what that was, but whatever it was had my parents legitimately scared. I've heard of weird shit happening in Appalachia, but this is the first time I've ever had a first-hand experience with it. Does anyone have any idea what this could have been? If you ever end up in the mountains after sundown, be careful, be respectful, and most importantly, don't touch the skulls. The first time someone told me that, I thought they were strange, superstitious folk. I just moved to a little town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, looking for a new start away from the busy cities I lived in for all of my life. A house with forest for a backyard and neighbors a mile or so away sounded perfect at the time. It's what led me to buying the property in the first place. Don't get me wrong, the house is nice. It has a few problems though, like a creaking porch and the kitchen is a bit too small for my liking, but it's cute. Quaint is what the realtor kept saying when she showed me the rooms, and I agreed with her. Even if it is a little small, the real selling point was the acres of forest that would be considered mine. I remember my first trip to the town at the base of the mountain, a small place where everyone knows each other. Naturally, some weren't sure about me, but most were actually nice. Asking where I grew up, what I did for work, normal questions, until the owner of the only grocery store in town, Mr. Faraday, asked me if I planned on hiking in the forest. Well, yes, of course. I think I laughed as he bagged up my groceries, eyeing me the entire time. Of course, silly question, he agreed, as he handed me the bags and then continued. The forest is perfectly safe during the day. Just get home once the sun starts setting. You're asking for trouble with the wildlife, or you'll get lost if it gets too dark. Anything in particular I should worry about? I mean, we get black bears sometimes. All you have to do is yell at them though, and they'll run usually. Scaredy cats. The lot of them, unless you find a mama. Moose, foxes, wild boars, and even wolves. I paused in gathering up my bags and repeated, "Wolves? I thought wolves were extinct here in the Appalachians." Mr. Faraday shrugged and ignored my question, continuing like I hadn't said anything. Be careful out there. Always take water. Be respectful. Don't be one of them city folk that make a mess of the place. See a flower and think it's pretty. You take a picture and leave it alone. Easy enough? Anything else I should do? I wanted to be nice and not just blow the guy off, even if most of his advice was common sense. Then again, I didn't doubt that there had been trouble in the past with some outsiders. It happened all the time in the parks I would go to as a kid. Jerks that would come through and leave beer cans or cigarette butts everywhere. He met my eyes, staring for a second too soon, before he replied, "If you see skulls or bones, don't touch them. If they are in the way, you go around them." I stared back, feeling uneasy as he suddenly smiled and said, "You come back soon, you hear? I run specials every week on fresh produce and meat." I should have listened better to him. The first few times I ventured into the forest, it was always in the late morning. There's an old trail behind the house, overgrown but still usable. There are all kinds of songbirds and small animals and interesting plant life to see. I tried going in the morning when it wasn't too hot. I also made sure to bring water and wore good hiking boots whenever I had time for a walk before work. There is a point in the trail where it branches off into two directions, and that is the point where I turned back around. The last thing I wanted was to choose the wrong path and end up hopelessly lost or unable to find my way back. Then work changed my schedule, so I started going in the late afternoon. I stayed out longer, just getting done with my hike as the sky was bathed in pinks and oranges. The sun no longer visible, but giving just enough light. I never noticed anything different between the morning and late afternoon hikes, other than less birds singing. Then small things began to happen, little oddities that were easy to write off. Trees that had long scratches down their trunks, or the songbirds quieting down at the start of my afternoon hikes, rather than towards the end. I figured it was from the seasons changing, the nights getting longer and days shortening. I had to be quick about my daily routine, only letting myself get maybe a mile into the forest before turning around. Even if I didn't believe the townsfolk that had gotten more vocal about being mindful of myself in the woods, I still didn't want to get lost. Then I came across a deer skull. It was in the middle of the path back to my house, bleached and cracked, looking far too old. I looked around the trees to see if anyone was around because I hadn't been there on my way up the mountain. I even called out, a nervous "hello?" and got nothing. The idea of leaving it where I constantly treaded made me sick, so I grabbed a stick and carefully put it through one of the eye sockets. I took a breath, then tossed it off into the trees, watching as it hit the ground before dropping the stick and quickly making my way back home. That's when the howling started. It woke me up in the dead of night. A long, lone howl off in the distance. I was confused, startled, because until that point, I had never heard a wolf howl before that wasn't on TV. I didn't even know if that's what it was. I laid there for a while, listening to it, then turned on some music to drown it out and go back to sleep. For a week, I would wake up in a cold sweat, and the wolf would be singing away until I finally started going to sleep with music. I asked about it the next time I went into town, curious if anyone else had heard it, but nobody did. Mr. Faraday shook his head and said he hadn't heard any noise as he gave me change for my groceries. The pharmacist told me it was probably just a lonely or hurt animal when I was looking for some sleep aid. Even the waitress at the diner shrugged and said, "Haven't heard a thing, honey. Just make sure to keep your doors locked. Always better to be safe than sorry." The next time I went into the forest, I made sure it was right after work so I could enjoy a nice long stroll. The trees with the scratches were closer to my home, but I shrugged it off, figuring it was a bear or a moose. I did my usual circuit, followed the trail until I got to where it branches off, and took a minor break, sitting on a fallen tree to drink some water. As I got up to start my way down, I noticed that the forest had become quiet. I felt nervous, glancing around to look for a reason, like a bear stalking about, but found nothing. At that point, I quickly headed back home and nearly tripped over another skull. A moose skull, going off the huge antlers still attached to the white bone, perfectly preserved and staring in my direction. I looked around, wanting to find who was messing with me, but I couldn't see anything but trees and lush ferns. I thought about picking it up and throwing it to the side, but I took a breath and walked around it, then began running back home. It appeared 2 more times before I had enough. On the 3rd time, I picked it up and threw it into the trees. I didn't stay to watch where it landed, and the moment I got home, I slammed the door and locked up everything. I was shaking, trembling in my kitchen after locking the back door and dared to look out the window. I didn't see anything, but I felt like something was watching me. A howl didn't wake me up that night, no. The sound of my porch creaking did. The groaning of wood had my eyes snapping open as my heart leapt into my throat. I laid in bed, unable to move, when I heard a low growl near my window. The curtain was so drawn, I couldn't see outside, but I could hear whatever it was. The sound was that of an animal. Something didn't quite sound right. I tried putting my finger on it when the growling stopped for a second. Then a howl rattled my windows and my bones. I rushed to my bathroom, the only place in the house that had no windows, and slammed the door shut, curling up in the bathtub. I didn't move until my alarm rang at 7 and the sun was shining through the curtains. It kept happening. Every night, the porch would creak, the growling would begin, then finally the howls that lasted until the sun came up. I had enough by the 4th or 5th night and drove back to town, functioning on a cocktail of adrenaline, fear, and caffeine. I had to wait for the store to open, but the moment it did, I sought out Mr. Faraday, who was stocking some items on the shelves. He glanced at me, then said, "You look like shit. If you need help sleeping, you should see the doctor." Something keeps showing up at my house. I think it's that wolf I was telling you about. He froze, a slight tremor in his fingers before he turned, calling, "Sarah, mind the front, I'll be back." He didn't wait for a reply and instead headed to the back of the store, motioning for me to come along. I did, following him through a door that led outside. Once out on the too sunny morning, he lit a cigarette, then sighed. "I told you to mind the bones." I broke down at that point, lack of sleep leaving me without a filter. It kept showing up. I ignored it the first time and it kept getting in my way. What was it? A moose skull. There was another skull 2 weeks ago. It was a deer, but I moved that with a stick. A shake of the head. Still counts, son. What happened after you moved the deer? I admitted that's when the howling first started, but it was far off in the distance, easy to ignore. Something that had him frowning, but not interrupting until I finally asked, "It's not a wolf, is it?" Mr. Faraday looked at me for a long time, then stubbed out the cigarette before reaching for another one. "I told you what not to do, and yet you did it. Now you've got a mess to deal with." I opened my mouth, so ready to demand he answer my question, but he kept going. "Now listen here, and you listen. You're going to buy some meat, the reddest, bloodiest meat I have, then go home and put them in the fridge. When the sun is setting, you're going to go in that forest with the meat and put it on the path. The minute you do that, you turn tail and run home. You don't look back. No matter what sounds you hear or feelings you get, you run and lock up tight. And it'll just go away." "Just like that?" I asked, feeling a tiny bit hopeful. The next words dashed those hopes away. "Nothing is guaranteed, son. This is you trying to make amends. It doesn't mean you'll be forgiven." Anger boiled in me, and I snapped at him. "I didn't even do anything." He shook his head with a small frown and said, "You show disrespect and acknowledge them. That's enough in a place like this." I opened my mouth, but he brushed past me and asked, "You gonna buy the meat or what?" I ended up doing so. I didn't know what else to do and figured why not just go along with it. I couldn't explain anything else, so why not try to make amends? I bought the bloodiest steaks I could find and drove back home in a daze. I set an alarm to ring just before sundown and crashed on my porch until then. It was surreal, walking out to the trail as the sun began its descent. I noticed that more and more trees had the strange scratches on them and shuddered at the idea of something, or many somethings, being so close to the house. I walked about 10 minutes up the path before laying out the steaks. It was disgusting, the blood collecting on the brown butcher paper, but I piled them up, then looked around. I couldn't see anything, just the usual trees, and decided to head back home. I took a handful of steps when I heard it. A low growling from behind me that had the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Heavy thumping followed the growling, getting closer and closer, breaking me out of my stupor. I got my feet moving again and headed back to the house as the sound of teeth ripping into raw meat met my ears. Once I was at the end of the path, my home in sight, I dared to turn my head before I ran back to the house, scrambling up the porch and barely slamming the door shut in time. It had been right behind me, following like an obedient dog. Only it wasn't a dog, not even a wolf. I had to brace myself against the door as it slammed into the wood, growling and grunting. I managed to lock it just barely before rushing to the front door to make sure I locked it as well. It nearly beat me. I hit the door just as it started to open and pushed my entire body weight against it. It seemed like it was barely enough to keep it out as I flicked the lock. I stumbled back, shaking and panting, staring at the door as the growling began all over again. This time, I followed it to the back porch and peered through the window. It walked on 4 legs, fingers sprayed out with long claws for nails and covered in black fur in some places, pale human skin in others. As it walked, the back legs bent unnaturally and make a horrific snapping noise, the bones visible through the skin and twisting with every movement. The head is the most disturbing, a bloodied muzzle that stretches out too much for a wolf, eyes glowing red, and can open the mouth far too wide. The fangs are all black and red with blood, too long, too curved. When it closes its jaws, blood oozes out. I stared at it, and it stared at me before the lips peeled back into a sort of demented smile. The growling stopped, and instead a new sound started. A sharp, high-pitched laugh, human almost, filled the air. I shivered, ready to shut the curtains when I heard more laughter. I looked beyond it, and froze at the sight of more pairs of red eyes out in the forest. The heckling grew in volume, echoing, until it's all I heard. Even now I still hear it. I hid in the bathroom again, feeling like a child and praying that my doors and windows would hold. Once the sun came up and I mustered up enough courage to get to my car, I found dozens and dozens of skulls on my porch, all different shapes and sizes, some bleached white, others black with decay, and some even red, and others laying in pools of blood. One of them was human. I wanted to run to the car, bulldoze through the bones, but instead I forced myself to carefully step over each and every one of them. Once I got back into town, I sought out Mr. Faraday. He listened quietly to my account, looking disappointed and annoyed by the time I was done, and said, "I told you not to look. Now you really made a mess, not just for you, but for everyone." My blood ran cold, and I asked, What do you mean? Everybody heard them last night, son, because of your fuck up. He closed his eyes, then lit a cigarette, even though we stood in the paper goods aisle. What if I just leave? Just go back where I came from. He shook his head and flicked the ashes onto the ground, uncaring of where they ended up. Then what? What do I do? You're going to clean up your own mess. A hunting party is gathering at the diner at sundown. You better be there. I asked if he really thought they could be killed. If it was possible, and he waved his hand and said, "We've done it before. You're not the first person to not listen. You won't be the last, but you made the trouble. You better be ready to help get rid of it." I swallowed, hesitating, then dared to ask, "Do people not come back from this hunting?" "All the time. This time won't be any different. Sundown, son. Or we'll not just be hunting them, but you too." We are gathered at the diner, and I've been given a shotgun and a crash course on how to use it. Shown how to load it, and told what not to do and what to watch out for. According to Mr. Faraday, who was around for the last purge, the wolves of the Appalachians is what they call them. He's sticking close to me. He says having a buddy nearby is important. It's safer this way. The wolves like to drag people into the forest or decapitate their victims. They collect the skulls. The bullets I have are supposed to be special, blessed by the priest and bathed in holy water or something like that. I've never hunted before. That's why I'm leaving this account in case I don't come back. Hunting accidents happen all the time. That's what the townsfolk will say if anyone comes asking about me, or anyone that doesn't come back. The sun hasn't set yet, giving us time to prepare, and the priest time to bless every bullet he can. We can hear them already. The wolves are laughing again.
I want to start this off by saying that I don't condone any of the behavior of what my friends and I did on this particular night. I'm well aware that this whole thing could have been avoided had my friends and I not have been such dumbasses. I made a huge mistake as well. It was midsummer, like the second week of August to be exact. My parents were gone for the weekend for some wedding out of town, and I had the house to myself. As a 17-year-old, I was pretty happy about being alone for the weekend. My parents trusted me too, because I wasn't really the type of kid to get into trouble, really. I mean, I had a few screw-ups here and there at school, but nothing major. I didn't smoke or drink at all, and neither did most of my friends. But this night was different. It all started out as a normal night of me playing on my Xbox with my friends, when one of them mentioned that we should sneak out. I wasn't necessarily opposed to this idea, but I wasn't really fond of it, nor was I that interested. It didn't sound like much fun to me. What were we going to do anyway? Walk around outside? Then what, you know? That's when Elias mentioned we should do something a little crazy. There was this house down the street that was abandoned, or so we thought at the time. We weren't 100% sure. Some weird girl that used to ride our bus for years lived there, but they must have moved out because one day she stopped getting on the bus. And after a few months, this house looked like a ghost town. The grass was really overgrown, and you could tell the property wasn't being maintained at all. Elias convinced me to go, so I told him I was down, and I asked him what our plan was. He told me we'll figure it out when we get there. The house sits on a corner of two intersecting back roads in the country. It's a 2-story white house with a big garage behind it. We rode our bikes there because it was kind of far to walk. When we got there, we immediately hit our bikes and ran up to the back door. But of course, it was locked. We then tried the front door as well, but it was also locked. We ran back to the back door, and we were going to try to kick it down, or break the handle with a sledgehammer that we found sitting on the side of the property. We started by kicking the door, but it wasn't budging, so we went to plan B. Elias started hitting the door handle, and after like 5 or 6 swings, he finally cracked it. We opened the door and slowly stepped inside. All we had was the flashlights on our phones to see. It was pitch black in there, and the house was an absolute mess. There were things scattered all around the floor, and it was nasty. Definitely not clean by any standards at all. As soon as we walked in, we noticed a door that was adjacent to the door we walked in from. It led to the downstairs area. Took a peek down there. Holy shit, dude. This place looks like something straight out of a horror movie. That gave me the creeps. I wasn't feeling ballsy enough to check it out down there yet. Not until we at least checked out the rest of the house anyways. We scavenged our way through the house and we didn't find much. Just a bunch of clutter and useless shit scattered around. We then walked upstairs and checked out all the rooms. Alright bro, we might as well just leave, I said. Wait, did you hear that? Elias asked. What? Did I hear what? Shh, listen, dumbass. I froze in fear when I heard what he was talking about. Dude, there's somebody in here. Shut the fuck up, Devin, Elias said. Jesus, man, you're gonna get us caught, idiot. We sat and listened for a little while as the noise continued. It sounded like somebody was rummaging through a bunch of boxes or drawers or something. Then what we feared most was coming true. We heard steps heading towards the stairs. Shit, bro, let's go, I said. We ran to one of the rooms and Elias hid in the closet. But I, on the other hand, started to open the window. I was making a lot of noise, but I didn't really care. My only focus was getting the hell out of the house. Wait, dude, what are you doing? Don't freaking leave, what the heck? Come on, bro, I said. We gotta go. That's when I jumped out the window. I hung onto the windowsill and I dropped down as carefully as possible. I hurt my leg pretty bad, but I landed better than I expected I would. Elias started yelling and told me to wait for him, so I did. Hurry up, man. You don't have much time, I said. That was when I ran behind a tree to try and camouflage myself. After that, Elias made a leap and he didn't land as well as I did, and he ended up hurting himself worse. Luckily, he was still able to limp a little on his own. He made his way over to the tree and he sat down to catch his breath. Bro, we seriously have to go, I said. Are you okay, by the way? He just looked at me with an obvious look that read no, he obviously wasn't okay. Suddenly, we heard some people talking next door. Thankfully, it was the neighbors. We started walking that way. Keep in mind, this was the country and the houses were pretty far apart. We realized we couldn't look to them for help though, considering we technically just committed a crime. I think we felt a form of comfort though, realizing there were other people out there if it came down to a life or death situation. We walked a ways further from the vacant house and found a better hiding spot to hang tight at while we got Elias's ankle situated. After a few minutes, we started to hear a bunch of loud noises and people yelling from the house that we had just broken into. There must have been 4 or 5 people in there. Then bam, out of nowhere. There were like 10 to 15 rounds let off of what sounded like an AR-15 or something crazy like that. We started to freak the hell out and we ended up running away as fast as we could with Elias's ankle being the way it was. We had to take a long walk back home. I'm talking about a 3.5 mile detour. Practically the whole way home I had to carry my half-mobile friend, who could barely even limp anymore without my help. Took us a good couple hours to get home, and we heard more gunshots from those crazy rednecks. I don't know what would have happened if we would have run into them. I don't know if they were squatters, or if they owned the house, or what the hell was going on with them. But a few months later, we heard on the news that someone was shot and killed in that house. They never caught the guys who did it though, and ever since, I can't help but wonder what the fuck happened. We never got a good look at the people either. But I know that they knew we were there. We tried to come back for our bikes a few nights later, but they were gone, so they must have taken them. It's crazy to think that someone died in that house, literally murdered while we were there. That easily could have been us. If we would have been found in there, we would have been killed for being a witness, I'm sure of it. I, female 23, was recently in Africa on vacation with my family, and we stayed 2 nights at a desert camp in the Sahara. The first night, my sister and I were talking about hanging out with the guys who worked there, who were all probably around ages 20 to 35. Seemed like they were just very friendly and harmless. I noticed at the campfire that night that one of the guys started paying more attention to me, and I felt a little uncomfortable by it, but I figured it was just a language barrier or something. So out in the desert, you can see the stars really well, and even the Milky Way on clear nights. But you have to wait for the moon to go down, which is around 2 a.m. I guess it's a normal thing for the guys to come around to the tents, which are luxury tents, furnished with beds, lights, a toilet, and shower as well as a lock on the doors, so not normal camping. I guess it was normal for them to come and knock on the door to see if you were awake and want to come look at the stars. My sister and I were sharing a tent, and my parents were in a separate one across the walkway. The first night around midnight, I told my sister I was too tired to go out because I was falling asleep, so she left to look at the stars without me, and I didn't lock the door because I didn't want her to get locked out if I fell asleep. Fast forward about an hour, and I'm on my side asleep when I wake up suddenly to see a head peeking in from the tent door. I thought it was my sister, so I groggily asked her, "What the fuck are you doing?" Because it was just weird the way she was standing there. I start to wake up more, and I realize that it's this guy from the campfire, and his head was peeking in my room while I was asleep. Now I know it could have been a simple misunderstanding, but I felt totally violated with my privacy. Especially because we were on their territory in the middle of the desert. Like, I'm not kidding, we had to take a 30-minute truck ride into the dunes. I was in fight or flight at that moment. He literally woke me up with a panic attack, and I started to feel extremely nervous and on edge. So I went to the door and I told him I was tired. He kept trying to get me to come out to the dunes with a blanket, but I just kept saying no and that I didn't feel good and that I was tired, which was true. At this moment, I don't know where my sister is, and I don't know where my family is. I'm disoriented, and all I know is that this man is standing in front of me, and was literally just watching me sleep. I don't know how long he was there for. It could have been a literal second, or it could have been 2 minutes. But either way, I was high-key horrified. I told him no again, and I said that I'd go look at the stars tomorrow night. He told me that he wouldn't be at the camp the next night, and that's why he wanted to go out tonight, but I wouldn't budge. Once he realized I wasn't going to come outside, he asked me if he could have my number, and I told him no, that I had a boyfriend. I don't actually have a boyfriend, but it seemed like the only way this man would respect my disinterest, by knowing there was another man in the picture. After I said that, he asked me for my first name, and I gave it to him because I thought it wouldn't do any harm, and then I said goodnight and locked the door this time. I went right to the bathroom and I had diarrhea. Not important, I just wanted to show that he scared the literal shit out of me. And while I was on the toilet, I heard him come back and start calling my name from outside the tent. But I just stayed quiet and I didn't say anything. I finished in the bathroom and I lied down in my bed, still trying to calm down from what had just happened because my heart was racing. I heard him come back again calling my name. I laid in bed still as I could and I didn't say anything. I tried texting my dad, but he wasn't answering, and I didn't feel comfortable leaving the tent. Finally, my sister came back and my dad was with her, so I told them what just happened, and they were confused, and they thought it was weird, and that was kind of it. The next day I brought it up at breakfast again, and my sister and dad basically told me I was being dramatic, and that I should just stop talking about it already, and that it wasn't that big of a deal. My mom was the only one who agreed with me that it was weird. The second night my sister and I were both out under the stars, talking to the guys and relaxing. Keep in mind, it's very dark and you can't see any faces, so I was having a normal convo with this one guy. I couldn't see him, but all was well. After a while, he asks me if I remember him, and I'm like, well, no, I can't see you. Oh, shine a light then, he said. So I do. And wouldn't you guess, it's the same dude from my tent as last night. I especially wasn't expecting him to be the dude in front of me because he had just told me he wouldn't be there that night, which leads me to believe he picked up a shift just to see me, but I can't be too sure. Either that or he was lying about not being there the next night in an attempt to get me out there with him. But surprisingly, he was fine that night and he respected my boundaries, so I didn't say anything to the guys who ran the camp. However, I was planning on doing so if he did anything remotely that made me uncomfortable, but he didn't. The next morning we left the area, and a few days later I started getting message requests on Instagram. Would you believe that this guy found me? I tagged the entire desert in the pics I posted. Like you're telling me he found me based on my name and a location. Not even a specific location, an entire desert. And my name isn't unique either. Anyway, he messages me, and although I'm creeped out, I'm also thinking, okay, well, now he's harmless, I might as well see what he says. He says, direct quote, I'm really happy to find your account. I was looking for a long time. Which I found highly creepy to even say to someone. But again, it could just be a cultural difference, who knows. I didn't answer him, and he messaged me again a few days later saying, hey, how are you? But I didn't answer. So yeah, I guess I'm just curious what you guys think about this, and if I was really overreacting, or if you think my literal gut feeling was right. He seemed to be harmless in the end, but you never know. This whole situation started when I was a teenager. I am now in my late 20s, and I'm a woman. It was one small conversation that I had completely forgotten about until 2 years ago. But in the past 2-ish years, more things have happened that made me really think about that short conversation. I was about 13, and my mom and I had just moved back in with my grandma, where my uncle was already living. And at the time, his friend was living with us as well. He was only staying for a few months. I never knew why, I just knew he was staying there. One day, while the friend was out of the house, my uncle sat me down and told me he didn't want me to be alone with his friend, and that I needed to call him if I found myself alone with his friend. Only about a week after my mom and I moved in, my uncle kicked his friend out. I was young and I didn't think much about the conversation, and I had completely forgotten about it. About 2 years ago, my uncle very suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. And after he passed, his friend came back into my grandma's life. I think my grandma kind of used my uncle's friend as a replacement for my uncle. And at first, everything seemed fine. But after a few visits, I started feeling weird around him and I didn't know why. And I remembered that conversation my uncle had with me. But I tried to move past it because it was over 10 years ago that we had that conversation. And he is married to a lovely woman, so I thought maybe things had changed. He made a lot of dumb jokes that I never found funny, but were always harmless. Like, here's an example. Sometimes I would come home with a bowl of snacks in it because my coworkers and I shared our snacks with each other, and he would ask where his share was. Small stuff like that. But then sometimes he made jokes about what I was wearing that would make me feel a little uncomfortable. But I was used to my family making similar jokes, so I brushed it off. Things like, oh, who are you trying to impress going out like that? And you must be fighting off men left and right. And other similar comments. I started to avoid leaving my room at that point when he would come over, but sometimes interactions with him were unavoidable because he would be here when I was getting home from work, or he would come over without warning. Another bit of backstory. I'm engaged to a man who lives in a different country, and with all the times that I've gone to visit him, I've really fallen in love with where he lives. On top of that, it's more affordable and overall much safer for us to live there, so we are working on moving me there to be with him. Well, I don't tell my uncle's friend anything because he makes me uncomfortable, but I know my grandma shares everything with him, so he knows all about this situation. And he has on more than one occasion asked me why I was moving, and I would explain that it's because that's where my fiance lives, and I absolutely love everything about where he lives. My uncle's friend will always come back with, oh, of course it's for a boy. And he has also made comments along the lines of, oh, I guess you're in love. I just don't understand it, but whatever. Like, he acts bothered that I'm engaged and moving away. But again, I would just hide myself away in my room and constantly convince myself that I was reading into things and overreacting. I also knew I couldn't say anything to my grandma about it because my family is one of those, like, if you don't want comments, you need to cover yourself up. And I'm not allowed to wear shorts around male family members because if they look at me and have bad thoughts, then it's my fault. Now, all of these small instances were very uncomfortable for me, but I just ignored them, hid in my room, did what I could to avoid the situations. But then, something happened today, and now I'm just feeling icky. I went into work, and my coworker told me how yesterday, a man fitting the description to a T, my uncle's friend, came into my work in the afternoon, after I had already left, asking about me. And he knew details like what I looked like, where I lived, even details about my move to another country, and he made comments about being my uncle's friend. Now, I didn't hear any of this, as I already had left for the day, but my coworker is a very trustworthy person, and doesn't just come up with this kind of stuff for fun. She'll even be the first one to call someone out on their BS if she catches them lying, so I trust what she's saying is true. But he was saying how ever since my uncle had passed, he has been trying to see me more and more because he just cares about me and sees me as his daughter. That comment alone weirded me out because I've barely interacted with this man and I avoid it at all costs, so why does he feel that close to me? He also started talking at length about my move to another country and he wouldn't leave the topic. Just kept talking about how he doesn't get how I could fall in love with someone so far away and how I should just stay here and find someone here to fall in love with. He was making other comments basically about how he doesn't approve of my move to be with my fiancée. This man is weirdly obsessed with me. I never told him where I worked, but I know my grandma probably did. It still weirds me out that he came into my workplace looking for me, and then talking at length with my coworkers about my choices and my future, and how he doesn't like it when I barely know him. I just can't wait to get out of this house and move far away from him. So this story took place when I was 12. It is more than half my lifespan ago, but I still get really uneasy when thinking back to it. I tried to block it from my mind and not guess as to what could have happened if it wasn't for the two kind strangers that helped me. I was walking home from school one day. It was a 4-kilometer walk along a busy road. I was alone. However, at one of the intersections I crossed, there was a tall, dirty-looking man that noticed me. I would guess his age was early 30s, but being a kid back then, I struggled telling the age of adults. He started following me and trying to strike up a conversation. He kept telling me that I was beautiful and that he wanted us to be friends. He asked me where I lived and if my parents would be home, and he asked me many more questions, but I tried to shrug him off and be polite. I didn't really answer any of his questions. I just increased the pace at which I walked. When we were nearing the block on which I lived, I started becoming really uneasy. He was following me, and I obviously wanted him to leave me alone. He gave off a weird vibe, because adults didn't usually speak to me that way. The only way I could get rid of him would be to give him my cell phone number and agree to answer when he calls. Because the situation made me uncomfortable, I gave him a fake number and I hightailed it out of there. A few months passed without me running into that man again, so I completely put this out of my mind. He was probably just some weirdo. However, as you can guess from here, things did not stay that way. One day, approximately 4 months later, I found myself walking home after school again. I will admit that I wasn't paying much attention to my surroundings. That was until I heard what sounded like footsteps running up behind me. My reflexes quickly made me turn around to look, and it was that same creepy man that I had encountered before. He slowed his pace as he reached me, but he was yelling at me the entire time. He figured out that I had given him the wrong number and he was furious. He kept yelling and saying that I think I am better than him, and that was why I gave him a fake number. I was terrified at that moment as he was really angry. I was afraid that he was going to hurt me, but I couldn't grab the attention of any motorists. Speed walked to the closest petrol station, which was luckily not too far, with him following behind me, still yelling the entire time. When I got to the station, I immediately got the attention of 2 burly men standing next to their pickup truck. They must have seen the terrified look on my face, plus the man following me as they immediately ran over to ask if I was alright. I was too scared to speak. I just shook my head frantically as I tried to get behind them. They immediately demanded to know why the man was following me. He fed them some BS, and the man tried to lie and say he was my brother. I just silently kept shaking my head. I guess they figured out what was happening at this point as I started yelling at the man. They were accusing him of being a child predator. I didn't stay to find out what happened. I took the opportunity of him being distracted and I started to run away. The man noticed that I was leaving and he tried to take off after me, but the men really took offense to this as they immediately tackled him and threw him in the back of their pickup. He was screaming at this point. They sped off with the guy at an inconceivable speed right past me and just kept going. I was happy that they took him away, but I didn't stop running until I reached home. I had no idea what to make out of this entire exchange, but it really shook me. I really don't want to know where they took that creepy guy or what they did to him after. In all honesty, I didn't want to know. I told my parents and I altered the route I walked home from school. I never saw him again and I'm thankful for that. Even though I could not say what I needed at that moment, those two kind strangers saw that I was in distress and dealt with it for me. Even after all these years, I still remember the sheer terror and then relief when they took him away. So I'm going to tell you the story of my brief encounter with a man called Happy. I'm sure it wasn't his real birth name, but it adds to the creepy ambience of the story. Even though it happened around 9 years ago, sometimes he still crosses my mind. Especially on gloomy overcast days in LA, just like the day I met Happy. It was 2013. I'm working at a cannabis dispensary in Venice Beach, a block from the boardwalk. A good 35% of our patrons were unhoused people. Occasionally someone experiencing severe psychosis would try to come in, but if they were screaming or unintelligible, security would not let them in. If they had and presented the holy trinity of medical papers, ID, and cash, they were good to go. We had a compassion program where we'd bag up grams of shake left over from the bottoms of jars and give them away completely free, one person per day, to anyone who asked. Word about this quickly spread on the boardwalk. Generally, these people would be the nicest, most polite, and considerate customers, even if they did smell a bit stinky and their money got pulled out of a sweaty sock. No one working there would ever bat an eye if someone came in smelling like they had just slept on the beach for a week next to a bottle of vodka, as long as they just calmly buy their weed and be on their way like any other customer. It was a foggy and chilly day around the holidays, sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Someone called out of work, so I was the only person in the back bud tending. There was another employee at the reception, and the security guard at the front door, but I was alone in the back room. There are cameras, but no one is actively watching them. This guy walked in after being checked in at the front, and he was the only customer at the moment. And I swear, the whole room gets a little colder as he walked in. He was wearing a very worn-in, deeply faded, wrinkled floor-length leather duster jacket like a cowboy. It looked like he lived and slept in these same clothes for years. We didn't really allow hats, hoods, or sunglasses in the store, so I'm surprised that the security didn't make him take his hat off. This man was like 6'5" and built like a boulder. Not really obese, but just large. Pick you up and toss you like a ragdoll type large. The stench that comes with him is unlike anything I've ever smelled before, though. It was beyond BO, beyond piss or shit. It smelled like actual death, as if he had raw, rotting carcasses tucked under his thick, long leather coat. I thought I had been hardened by the plenty of nasty body stank before, but this was absolutely revolting and far beyond anyone who hadn't showered lately or pissed their pants. I'm trying not to inhale very deeply, and I say, "Hi, sir. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Would you mind taking off your hat? Just store policy," with a big customer service smile. "What are you looking for today?" He grunts deeply and is walking very slow, shuffling and dragging his feet. His voice sounds like he gargles with gravel, rough and wet, raw and angry. "I don't take off my hat," he said. At this point, I'm not trying to argue with this man about his hat either. Let's just get him in and out. I glance down and see that he's not wearing shoes. The bit I can see from under his coat. One of his ankles is massively purple or blackish colored and swollen, like the size of a melon. The bottoms of both of his feet are bloody and torn up, and I realize he is leaving a slight trail of blood as he drags his ragged feet across the concrete floor of the shop. My first thought is, why and how the fuck did security let this guy come in? Second, is this guy is obviously injured, and that was concerning as a human being. I'm making sure to keep the display shelf between me and this guy, but that's only about a foot of space, kind of like a bar. He gets closer to me and the stench gets stronger. I meekly but sincerely ask, "Are you alright, sir?" His eyes then flared at me. "What do you care?" he said. And then in my head, I'm kind of like, well, I tried, not my life, not my problem. Not my monkeys, not my circus. "Great, so what can I get for you?" I asked. He then pulls up one of his sleeves to expose his forearm, and it was covered in a large amount of burns, like from a cigar. Some were old, some were healed, and some were fresh, pussy and infected. It wasn't track marks, it was clearly third-degree burns. He also had a jagged, homemade-looking stick-and-poke tattoo of a smiley face, the crooked circle, 2 lines for the eyes, and an eerily-looking smile. He pointed at this tattoo. "Happy. My name is Happy," he said. The rotting stink was so strong, and I needed to breathe, so I took little gasps, the least amount possible. "I walked here. I walked all the way from Pasadena." "Wow, sir, that's a very long walk. Anyway, what are you looking for today?" "Just for you," he said. His eyes are dark and menacing. He's smeared with a layer of grime like he lives in the woods. He doesn't look like the average crushed punk or disabled veteran that you would generally see living on the beach. It was hard to guess his age, but he wasn't that old or young, somewhere between 30 and 50. He looked like he dragged himself from his log cabin. Like, what would happen if you entangled some quantum mechanics poorly and mixed Ed Gein with an 1800s homesteader, then transported him to 2013 Venice Beach? I, of course, have never seen this man before, but once was more than enough to make him unforgettable. He kept staring at me, and I move as far back as I can to the wall, hopefully out of his grasp if he lunged. I would need to walk out from behind the register and around to him to get to the security guard. I was weighing my options. I decided to grab a bunch of compassion grams, and then I weighed out an eighth, and I marked it down that I'd pay for it later. And he's still just leering at me, wheezing heavy breaths. "We actually have a special today, only for people who walked more than 10 miles to get here. This is all for you, on the house. Thank you for stopping by." He accepted the bag, but continues to just stand there and stare at me. "Thank you, Happy," I said. It actually worked. He grunted a guttural noise that was not a word, and slowly turns to shuffle back towards the door. At the door, he turns back towards me and says, "I'll see you later." He finally walked out after, leaving plenty of his residual stench of death behind. Thank any and all of the gods I did not see Happy later, or ever again. When I asked security why the F they let him in, he said that he had noticed his bloody feet, and said, "Hey bro, are you all good? It looks like it hurts." Apparently Happy stepped up in his face and threatened to choke him out, and called him a stupid N-word. And since it was just him and 2 22-year-old, 130-pound girls, he wasn't trying to die, and hoped that Happy would just get his stuff and leave. He was watching the cameras in the back, ready to call the police and owners if anything got too weird. Apparently we had different definitions of weird, but I understood his reaction, and ultimately we were all fine, just spooked and creeped out. But now we were left with needing to clean blood off the floor with bleach and gloves, and texting our boss that he owed us free weed. He actually agreed, and we all lived happily ever after. About 10 years ago, a few of my buddies and I went on a short-lived camping and fishing trip in a pretty remote lake a few hours from our small town. We were all packed and ready to go. The trip there was pretty quiet until we started to get pretty close to our destination. As we got closer, I think we all started to get a little excited, and some of us had that excitement adrenaline rolling through us. When we got there, we set up camp. Nothing too crazy. We only had 2 tents between the 4 of us and our own backpacks with what we needed for the weekend. After getting settled in, we grabbed all of our fishing gear, a shit ton of beer, and headed off to the lake to try our luck with fishing. It was probably around 3 p.m. We were all having a blast. Some of us may have been a little bit more drunk than we should have been, but that was all part of the fun. Just men being men. After a number of hours rolled by, we were all ready to call fishing a day. It was around 8 o'clock and dusk was approaching, so we started heading back to camp. We were quite a ways from camp still, and we didn't realize how far we went. We knew we were a ways out, but I think we all sort of lost track of how far we really went. It was no big deal though. The sunset was beautiful, and we were approaching camp just in time for nightfall. When Jimmy and Tom were getting out of their boat, we noticed some flashing lights up ahead through the woods past camp. When they disappeared after a few seconds, we figured they were just passersby, so it only shortly lived in our minds. "Holy crap, guys, look," Tom said. We all looked in the direction he was pointing in, and there was a freaking bear, no more than 50 feet away from where John and Timmy were standing. "Yo, just stay calm, dude, and he will leave us alone." We all quietly walked back to camp relatively slowly because we didn't want to set off the bear into thinking we were prey. Luckily, we all made it safely to camp. Just as soon as we thought all of our problems were gone, we heard a car in the distance. It was rolling in closer now, and we started to see the headlights. Then a few moments after that, the car rolled up on us at camp. It was an all blacked out SUV. I gulped in fear as I've heard horror stories of people being attacked in the woods just out of the blue, and unfortunately, that's what my mind went to, fight or flight. I felt a slight panic inside as the 2 men stepped out of the vehicle. They both had to be over 6'1" or 6'2", and they were both jacked as hell. They introduced themselves as sheriffs, and they asked us what we were doing out here. Tom said we were camping, and that's when I blurted out to leave us alone. I had a fishy feeling about what was going on. We could barely see them in the darkness as they were shining their dumb flashlights at us. They said they saw us fishing and demanded to see our fishing licenses, which we all had, so it wasn't really a problem. I didn't want to give mine up though, because I started to wonder if they were even real cops. Plus, we didn't do anything for them to suspect that either of us committed a crime, and I verbally let them know that I knew my rights as a US citizen. One of them demanded I give them my ID, and they threatened to arrest me if I didn't give it up. I wasn't letting him scare me though. My dad is a cop, and I know it's not normal for them to abuse their power like this. My father always told me what to do in a situation like this. I told them my father was the chief of police for the county, and I asked them what county they worked for, but they didn't answer my question, of course. And yeah, I did lie a little, but I was hoping to build some street cred for our group. My dad wasn't the chief of this county specifically, but the next county over. After I told them that though, we could all tell that they were starting to get choked up, and they started pretending like there wasn't an issue any longer. "Sorry for bothering you guys," one of them said. Then they walked away and got back in their car. As they were walking back to the SUV, we noticed they weren't wearing a traditional police uniform. They were just wearing normal flannels and sweatpants. Maybe we should have chased them down or called the police, but we never did. We were all sure that they were fake police. When I got home, I told my dad about it, and he never alerted the station because none of us could give enough detail about the men. Can't help but wonder what their plans were, whether or not they were real cops or not. If they weren't, were they going to try and search us and disarm us of all of our weapons, then attack us and rob us? If they were real cops, were they just on a power trip? Who knows, but I'm glad nothing worse came of this situation. I've hesitated to share this story for a long time, because I know how important the mutual trust between a resident and their landlord or maintenance staff is. And I don't want to instill any unnecessary distrust in anyone's landlord. I've shared stories before about dangerous and scary residents that I've encountered while working at apartment complexes. but this is a story about my time on the other side of things as a renter. Before I had even graduated from high school, I knew I wanted to live at Paradise Apartments. I was a bit naive at the time, drawn in by the many amenities that I would never use, but I primarily wanted to live there because the complex was pet-friendly and within my small budget. When the time eventually came for me to get my own place, I got the only apartment they had available and I moved in. Unfortunately, I came to realize the apartment wasn't as nice as I had originally thought. The building was old but remodeled, so it had all the typical plumbing issues and thin walls. I also learned it was not the safest part of town. I was primarily an online student, but I had one class that met in person twice a week around 8 a.m. I am a bit of a homebody, so I rarely left during the day, except for that class, the occasional shopping trip, or to spend time with my boyfriend in the evening after he got off work. My apartment was a bit of a Bermuda Triangle. Even though it was only 600 square feet and I lived alone, things had a way of growing legs and walking away. I had 2 kittens at the time, and I blamed them often for things disappearing. Something odd that kept recurring, however, was that I'd find my underwear box out and sitting in the center of my bedroom floor on days when I had class. I didn't have a proper dresser. Instead, I was using an IKEA shelf with some IKEA boxes for designated clothes, like socks, underwear, pants, and pajamas. I always could have sworn I'd put the underwear box right away after getting ready for class, but I chalked it up to me forgetting as a result of having to get up early and being focused on getting to class on time. Arguably paranoid, I started to think that some of my laundry was disappearing as well. His favorite articles of clothing would go into the laundry hamper and seemingly never come back with the clean clothes. Towards the end of that semester, I was working one evening on a homework assignment when my boyfriend called to let me know his roommate had accidentally locked him out of their apartment. I had a key to their place, so he asked if I could run over real quick to let him in. Before I left, I made a mental note that I had literally left every single light in my apartment on. Because I was living on a pretty tight budget, I normally made a point of turning off all the lights when I left. But my boyfriend only lived about 5 minutes away, so I knew I'd be there and back very quickly. Sure enough, I got back less than 15 minutes later. I immediately sensed something was off, as I could see the lights were off all through the blinds. I called my boyfriend and he drove over to meet me. We unlocked the door and went in. All the lights were off in my apartment. Thinking maybe I had a power outage, I flipped on the main light and it came on. My boyfriend checked the entire apartment, but no one was inside. But someone had gone through and systematically turned off every light at their switch, including my lizard's basking light, the only light that I always left on because it was on a timer, and my laptop, which I left open on my assignment, but now the computer had been powered down and closed. Called the emergency maintenance number and I explained that someone had been inside my apartment and that they had to have used a key because there was no sign of forced entry. The manager called me back and told me I had to be imagining things. Maybe I had forgotten that I turned off the lights before I left. I assured him that I wouldn't have turned off the computer or the lizard light, and that someone had been in my apartment. I told him I was really worried because obviously this person had a key to get in. Either they worked for the complex, or maybe it was a previous tenant. I asked if they had changed the locks after the previous tenant moved out, and they assured me that they changed the locks after every move out. The manager suggested that maybe it was a friend pranking me, or someone else I had given a key to. The only other people I'd given keys to were my boyfriend and my mom, but she lived 3 hours away. In any case, neither of them would have pranked me in this way. The manager finally agreed to send someone out immediately to change the lock for my peace of mind. I brought up my concern that it was someone on the staff, since they would be the only other people with keys. The manager claimed the keys were locked in a special safe that required a personalized code to track who took what keys, when, and where, and that they had them in an office with a security camera. They changed my locks, but I had my doubts that it would do much good. As far as I was aware, there were only 2 maintenance men that worked at the complex. One nice older man that didn't seem all that skilled, and a younger guy with a scruffy beard that gave me a bad feeling. I suspected that he had to be the one that had been breaking in. When I had first moved in, the manager had told me I would be getting a new kitchen counter within the first 3 days. I waited to move my kitchen stuff, but after a week they hadn't come, and then after a few months I had completely forgotten about it. One day, I was sitting in my living room and this scruffy maintenance guy walked in without knocking or announcing himself, and I hadn't received a notice to expect him. He said he was there to replace my countertop, but it took him 2 days to install one small piece of counter. A few weeks later, I was getting out of the shower and I heard a single knock at the door. I called out, "Just 1 minute," and I hurried to get some clothes. Not even 2 seconds later, the door started to open. I had to slam it shut because I was still wrapped in a towel to stop him from coming in. He claimed he hadn't heard me call out, but I had my doubts. I don't remember what excuse he had for coming in. Another time I found a note from him that he had come in again, and it didn't give me a reason as to why, but that he made sure not to let my cats out. He also made a note about my third cat being cute, except I didn't have a third cat. I did, however, have a picture of my childhood cat in my bedroom on the IKEA shelf where I kept my clothes. At that point, I went to the office to ask them to make a note in my file that I A. wanted at least 24 hours notice before entry, and B. wanted to always be present for future entry. Now that I knew without a shadow of a doubt that someone was coming in secretly, it all made sense. It hadn't been long after the surprise maintenance visit stopped that things had started moving around in my apartment. He was also on site, all the time. Everyone on staff also lived at Paradise, so he knew when I came and went. We knew how many times he had snuck in, how many small souvenirs he had stolen. Could have been coming in while I was asleep even. After the night with the lights, I put my own lock on the door, but I still didn't totally trust the apartment. I ended up buying a condo shortly after, with help from my parents. I subleased the apartment and moved. Right around that time, I also got my first job working in a different apartment complex. In the final days before I left, my mom came into town to help me move my stuff. While she was home alone, I was at a class. She caught the scruffy maintenance man trying to get his key to work in my lock. She demanded to know what he was doing, and he said he was there to paint the front door. I hadn't received a notice though, and he didn't have any paint or supplies. She told him he could wait until after I moved out. A few years later, I was stopped by the owner of Paradise Apartments while working at another complex in town called OK Apartments. So basically, shopping is when an employee from another apartment complex takes a tour at another apartment complex under the guise of wanting an apartment for the purpose of gaining information that they might not otherwise easily give up. It can also be performed by your own management company to make sure that you're doing a good job. There were certain tells a shopper always gave, like asking specifically worded questions. Is it safe here? I'm a felon, can I live here? You know, ones that required specifically worded answers and were easy to trip up on. Being too wealthy for the complex, Rolex watch, sports car, nice suit, etc., and being too flexible on what they were interested in. They were interested in all the layouts, and they were open to move in whenever. This guy seemed too old and too well off to be randomly considering an apartment at OK, so we were geared towards lower income folks. While I was giving the tour, he asked if I had any opinions on other apartment complexes in town and mentioned Paradise specifically. Normally I wouldn't badmouth any other complexes. I preferred to win them over by showing them the positives of our community, but I told him that I probably wasn't the best person to answer that question because I was probably the only person to give Paradise a bad review in the last 5 years. He asked me to elaborate, and I told him my apartment had been broken into, and I suspected it was someone on their maintenance staff. At that point, he revealed that he was the owner of Paradise, and that he was very disturbed to hear I had this experience. He asked me to describe the maintenance man in detail. I assured him it was in the past and that I was over it, but he insisted on calling the manager over at Paradise, which was still the same guy, to ask him over speakerphone if they had any issues with the maintenance staff back in the year I lived there. He answered yes, that there had been a scruffy young maintenance man he had to fire because he had been caught multiple times breaking into the apartments of single women. Satisfied now, the owner probably told me that the issue had been resolved and asked if I would be willing to change my review. I told him no, that none of this had changed the fact that I experienced this, but I was happy he was actually able to validate what I had suspected. In the years I worked as a leasing agent, I learned a lot about where complexes will cut corners to save time and money. From my experience, a lot of complexes did not switch out the locks if the tenant was good, And a lot did not require background checks for employees, even though they did require them from tenants. Keys also got passed out willy-nilly to vendors and maintenance during turns, and employees frequently got master keys that would open all the doors. I won't go so as far to say every complex operates this way, but every complex I worked at was doing this when I started there. Because of my own experiences, once I began managing a complex, I enforced strict rules about changing locks, tracking keys, posting proper notices, and requiring background checks for all employees and tenants. At least here in Florida, with MIA's law going into effect this year, background checks for employees and security measures for keys are required for all complexes. Even still, if you're renting an apartment, stay diligent. If you have a reason to believe someone is coming into your home, you should document it and let the staff or police or your friends and family know. You never know who might have a key to your apartment. In 2008, I was in the market for buying a new truck. I went to a few dealerships, but only found a few that merely caught my eye. I was in no rush to get a new one. I just wanted to make sure I was going to be happy with the one that I was getting. That was what was most important to me. I found a 2005 F-150 on Craigslist for a decent price. It had low miles on it as well. The only thing that needed to be replaced were some tires, which was kind of a hassle, but I was still interested. I figured I could talk him down on the price for the inconvenience of it. He gave me the supposed address of where he and the truck was located. And when I showed up, I was met with a nice older gentleman, probably late 50s, early 60s. He seemed like an alright man, or a normal guy. He was very straight to the point and he didn't have much to say. I asked him for a slight discount on the truck considering the tires, and he seemed reluctant at first, but we came to an agreement. My fiancée rode with me to look at the truck in case I were to end up buying it. That way she could drive the other vehicle home and I would drive for the new truck. But that's what ended up happening. After a quick test drive, I decided I wanted it, so I gave him the cash and we were on our merry way. I was excited about it, and that I got a new truck for such a killer deal. We went home and we went on about our day. It wasn't until later that night when I stepped outside to smoke a cigarette, I saw a shadow of what looked like to have been a man standing in my driveway. Now I have a long driveway and we live in the country. It was really dark and all I could see was the shadow of him. It was pitch black. I guess I didn't even know if it was a man or a woman, but from the build of the person I assumed it was a man. I called out to him asking who he was, but he didn't answer. I threatened to call the police if he didn't walk away, and after that he started walking towards me. I ran inside quickly and I told my wife to call the police and to let them know that there was an unknown man in our driveway. I ran into our room and grabbed my rifle and walked back outside to try and scare him off, but he was gone. I was hoping he got the memo. Right then I chuckled to myself as I thought I scared him off, but I was completely wrong. Because in an instant, I heard my wife screaming for my help inside. I ran as fast as I could to her, and I saw that the man had her pinned to the ground. I ran over to them and I hit him with the butt of my rifle and I knocked him out cold. Apparently we left the garage door unlocked and that's how he let himself into our house. I put a zip tie around his wrists and I put them behind his back in case he were to wake up and try to run off. We waited for the police to show up, and I wasn't sure if he was even alive at one point, so I checked his pulse. His heart was still beating, so I was kinda glad I didn't murder him. The cops showed up and arrested the man, but not before taking him to the hospital. My wife and I were taken in for questioning, but ever since then, I've been an over-the-top, on-edge paranoid kind of person. I genuinely think I developed some sort of PTSD from this shit. I learned that he placed some GPS tracker under our truck before selling it to us, and that's how he found us. Why? I'm not sure. The whole thing is extremely strange, and my wife and I still think about it from time to time. We don't have a clue what he had against us, or why he would want to do such a thing to us at all. And the police never got a good answer from the man on why he did it. It's clear there was something mentally wrong with him, but still, what compels a man to be violent like that for no reason? He's honestly lucky he walked out of my house alive after grabbing my wife like that. Just saying. So for a quick backstory, I've had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never aggressive or sent me proper threats, so stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear. To be honest, after a while I wasn't even scared anymore since he almost never came close to me. And I know being stalked can affect people severely, even in a case like mine, and that's totally valid, but I guess I got lucky and I was never really psychologically affected by it. His stalking behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts, such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times, but they weren't able to catch or identify him. Since I barely use any social media aside from Reddit and have no personally identifying information here, I didn't think he'd ever see it. One person even asked, "Does he know you're putting him on blast on Reddit?" And I answered, maybe it would make him angry, or maybe he'd be turned on. Don't know, don't care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it, and he definitely didn't like it. Like I said, he was never usually aggressive, and he never came close to me. The closest I know of was when he sent me a picture of me by myself unlocking my apartment door. I consider myself a pretty vigilant person, and I'm thinking that he might have hid a camera there instead of being there to take the photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he was physically there, but I don't know for sure. I don't know how he got wind of the AMA, but he did. The next week was quiet. No letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then he left me letters with printed out questions and my answers from the post. He also left me a long hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue that I had posted on the German version of r/am I the asshole. His letters were never hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later I got a gift, but this time he didn't leave it in my mailbox or at my car like he usually did. No, this time he left it inside the apartment building right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment, but I opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was also taped shut. As I'm typing this out, I realized that it wasn't a good idea at all to open it, and it could have ended badly for me. But luckily he didn't send me a bomb or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, the kind you use to tape off walls when painting, nothing you could use to restrain someone, a TV remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of band-aids with a few used ones. Not actually used, just made to look like that, according to police. And a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago, and my boyfriend was next to me but cut out of the photo. The frame was shattered and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame. And they were also intentionally put inside the crumpled newspaper that was stuffed in there to keep it all in place. I called the police right away and I gave it to them. They were more concerned this time finally. They told me they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave me any letters or gifts for about another week and a half. But 8 days ago it started again. Found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me, how I haven't been appreciating his effort, and how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago, I left my apartment in the morning and I heard a crunch sound as I stepped on my doormat. He put broken glass under it at night. I went off to work in a hurry because I was in a hurry, and I was just going to make my boyfriend call the police. But then I found my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, lights smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on it. The phrase read, "It's time soon, miss," with my first and last name. I went back inside and I called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just pissed at this point, which I made very clear. If for some reason you're like me and just too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, then all of this, the letters, gifts, photos, even the damn glass under my doormat, are just really annoying and inconvenient. But my car was useless to me now, and that threat scared me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police took the footage as evidence, even though the dash cam footage wasn't high of quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before, but they said it wasn't enough. They told me they'll look into it further and promised to send more patrol cars again. Then it was quiet for 2 more days. Until 2 days ago, someone rang the doorbell just after 4 a.m. My boyfriend and I got up, but we were both hesitant. I saw blue lights outside, and just as I got up, I heard them shouting, "This is the police, open the door." They told us they were called by one of our downstairs neighbors who came home from his night shift about an hour earlier and heard someone else enter the building after them before their door was fully shut. My neighbors know of my situation, and I've asked them to make sure they don't let strangers into the building before. This neighbor then went into his apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion-activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they turned back on, and they did. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor are only me and my boyfriend, and a single mom with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 a.m. They came and found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. You should have been able to see the cop car since there's a little window up there, and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or he wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him, and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He's finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a provocative Reddit post, and one very vigilant and caring neighbor, but he's finally done. For now, at least. He's facing several charges, and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now I finally got some peace. For some context, I'm a 32-year-old female. This happened to me when I was about 25 or 26. I work full-time as a researcher at a university, which is where these encounters took place. I'm not a professor or anything, and because of my age at the time, I could have easily been mistaken for just another student wandering around campus. On some days, when the weather was nice, I would prefer to spend my lunch hour strolling around the university grounds outside or sitting underneath a shady tree on a bench, enjoying the time I was not sitting in a cramped corner of a lab. On one of these days, I was sitting on a bench enjoying the fresh air, and a male student walking by asked if he could sit next to me. I'm a pretty shy and awkward kind of person, so even though I would really have preferred sitting alone, I said sure. He initiated simple conversation, to which I obliged, but being careful not to be too forthcoming. He mentioned he had seen which department building I came and went from, which slightly alarmed me given I had never seen this person before in my life. But I pushed the thought from my mind. After all, the weather had been decent lately and I had spent nearly all my lunch hours for the past week outside. He asked if I was studying within the mentioned department, to which I told him that I was not a student, but rather I worked here. He told me he was an engineering student, and then he followed up with asking me out to coffee sometime. I apologized and I told him that I had a boyfriend and that I would have to decline. We parted ways after that, and I assumed I probably wouldn't see him around again. About a week or 2 went by and I was spending another lunch hour outside on campus, sitting on a different bench somewhere. Seemingly out of nowhere, the same man from before asked if he could sit next to me again. I don't remember what he started talking to me about at first. My mind was reeling and I was rather uncomfortable having to potentially turn this guy down a second time. Sure enough, he asked me again if we could go out for coffee sometime. I apologized and reminded him that I had a boyfriend and that I would not be meeting him for coffee. And again, he left after that. I was feeling rather anxious now, but it still hadn't reached a level where I felt like I had to be too concerned. A few days later, I had finished work and I was leaving the building to walk to where I had parked my car. The university charges a fortune for parking passes, even if you're employed by them, so I had always opted for free street parking about a 10-minute walk away from campus. My walking route would take me down several quiet residential streets with minimal car traffic. Even pedestrian traffic was pretty sparse on the busiest of days. It wasn't until I was about halfway to my car, down one of these quiet back streets, that I noticed someone walking directly across the street from me, but keeping a few paces behind. I noticed him from my peripheral vision, and I didn't want to flat out turn around to stare at him. I mean, it wasn't uncommon to see someone else by any means. I was just always trying to be aware of my surroundings when walking the streets alone. I had to make a few turns coming up anyways, and the chance that they would be going the same way as me was slim. But he did. He made all the turns that I did, still walking on the sidewalk across from me, a few steps behind. Still did not want to look at whoever it was. I didn't want him to know that I was aware of what I thought he was doing. I quickened my pace to a speedy walk. I was approaching the first of the two busier streets before I would reach my car. His pace quickened to keep up with me. That was the moment I panicked. The moment I was sure that he was indeed following me. After that, I started a full-out jog to cross the first street of the busier streets. He ran to keep up behind me, and was now on the same side of the street that I was. I was now nearly at my car, but I had to cross the last busy street and get about 100 meters, and then I would be there. But it was crossing the street that worried me. I often had to stop and wait a good minute or so before it was clear enough to do so. If this were the case, he would catch up with me. As if the stars aligned, as soon as I made it running to the busy street, I had a gap to cross. I booked it as fast as I could, finally turning around once I had made it, to look and yell at the man who had been pursuing me. It was him. I could have suspected, but now it was confirmed. It was the engineering student from who I had turned down for coffee. "Stop following me," I yelled at him across from the busy street. "Can I just talk to you?" he yelled back. I didn't even answer him. The answer should have been obvious from the start, and I was certainly never going to give my time to anyone who had just followed me and then chased me for about a kilometer. I kept moving quickly to my car, so determined to get the hell out of there that I didn't even care if he saw which car was mine. He had given up following me and never tried to cross the road too, to my relief. I got home and I broke down. I mean, worse things had happened to other people, no doubt, and I was not harmed fortunately, but I was shook. I had some anxieties walking to and from work after that. It wasn't long before a coworker and I would walk most of the distance back to our cars together after work. I even changed where I started parking for a time. A few weeks had passed since the incident, and I had not seen him around campus at all. I had started spending my lunches in the lab instead of outside, but occasionally I would go to the student center to buy lunch instead. This one particular day, the food court in the student center was packed, almost shoulder to shoulder. I was standing in line at a burger stall, and I heard a guy try and get someone's attention through the crowd. I look up and it's him again, waving to me and trying to make his way through the people. I panicked, and even though I'm terribly shy, I started a scene and I yelled to him to leave me the fuck alone. His face dropped instantly as people stared at us, and he slinked back into the sea of students. My heart was pounding and I was shaking. I don't even remember if I ended up getting food after that. I went back to work, and from then on, I was even more focused on my surroundings than I ever was before. It's been 5 or 6 years since then, and I still work at the university. I'm so relieved to say I never saw him again after the food court, and I haven't had any other harrowing accounts on campus. I'm still diligent about being aware of my surroundings, especially when I have to walk to and from campus alone. I never asked this guy his name, so I couldn't even report an incident to the campus police or anything. All in all, I'm just glad I never saw him again, and I can only hope he never did this to any other girl before or after me.